Somewhere in the vast frozen expanse south of Moscow, buried deep beneath strata of granite and reinforced concrete, a computer server is humming. It is not mining crypto. It is not hosting a website. It is waiting. For 40 years, this machine has sat in silence, listening to the world above. It listens for seismic shifts. It listens for spikes in radiation. It listens for the sudden silence of human voices on military radio frequencies. That it is arguably the most terrifying object ever constructed by human hands. It is a mechanism designed with a single, chilling purpose: to guarantee the end of the world, even after its creators are already dead. In the West, intelligence agencies call it the dead hand. In Russia, it is known as perimeter. And the most disturbing fact isn't that it was built during the height of Cold War paranoia. The most disturbing fact is that the system is still switched on. The file you are about to open was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. Take a breath. Let the noise of the modern world fade into the background. Imagine you are stepping out of the bright, chaotic light of the day and descending a long, spiral staircase made of cold steel. Down here, the air is cool and smells of old paper and ozone. You are entering the archive. The lights overhead are dim, casting long, blue shadows against the rows of metal filing cabinets that stretch into the darkness. The only sound is the low, rhythmic hum of the ventilation system and the faint click of a magnetic tape reel spinning in the distance. Here, in this quiet space, we examine the things the world has forgotten. We look at the blueprints of madness and the architecture of silence. Tonight, we are pulling a file from the deepest section of the vault. It is a heavy dossier bound in grey cardboard, smelling of dust and secrets. As we untie the string and open the cover, we find not just a story of war, but a story of artificial intelligence, human fear, and the ultimate paradox of safety. Relax your shoulders, clear your mind. Let us trace the wires of the Doomsday machine, from the sensors in the ground to the rockets in the silos. Let us understand the logic of the end. To understand why such a machine exists, we must first strip away the comfort of our modern perspective. We have to travel back to a time when the world lived under a constant, invisible shadow. The early 1980s. It was a time when the psychology of the world leaders was dominated by a single, overwhelming concept: mutually assured destruction, or MAD. The logic was simple, brutal, and mathematically elegant. If Side A attacks Side B will have just enough time to launch their own weapons before they are destroyed. The result is that both sides die. Because both sides die, neither side will ever attack. Peace is maintained through the absolute certainty of suicide. But there was a flaw in this logic, a terrifying variable that kept Soviet generals awake at night in their dochas outside Moscow. The variable was time. As missile technology advanced, the time between a launch and an impact shrank. In the 1960s, you might have had 30 minutes to decide if the radar blip was a glitch or a warhead. By the 1980s, with the introduction of American Pershing to missiles in Europe, that window of decision collapsed. 5 minutes, perhaps 10, the Soviet strategists realized that in a surprise attacker decapitation strike, the leadership in the Kremlin could be vaporized before they even had the chance to pick up the red phone. The chain of command would be broken. The order to retaliate would never be given. And if the enemy knew that they could wipe out the leadership fast enough to prevent a counterattack, then mutually assured destruction was no longer a guarantee. It was a gamble. This fear birthed a dark technological solution. If the humans might be dead, or too panicked to act, then the decision must be taken out of human hands. They needed a system that did not sleep, a system that did not panic, a system that did not need a phone call from the General Secretary. They needed a machine that could execute the apocalypse on autopilot. The engineers at the Uchnoy Design Bureau were given a classified directive: build a failsafe. But unlike normal failsafes, which are designed to stop a catastrophe, this one was designed to ensure it completed its cycle. This was the birth of Systema Perimeter. It was designed to be the ultimate observer, a dormant beast buried in the silos, connected to a vast network of sensors spread across the largest country on Earth. It was designed to ask a series of questions, constantly, every second of every day. Question 1, is the motherland still there? Question 2, is anyone left to command the army? Question 3, should I launch the rockets? It sounds like science fiction, a plot device from a movie about evil computers. But the documents in front of us, declassified after the fall of the Iron Curtain, showed that the engineering was very real. It wasn't built on malice. It was built on fear. The fear that silence was the most dangerous sound of all. Let's look closer at the decapitation theory. This is a crucial concept to understand the mindset of the era. In the archives of American nuclear strategy, there was a belief that if you could blind the enemy's radar and sever their communications, the war could be won. But the Soviet doctrine was different. They assumed that the Americans would try exactly that. They assumed that the first casualty of World War III would be the communication lines, so Perimeter was designed as a communication system of last resort. It was a ghost network. Even if the telephone lines were melted, even if the radio towers were toppled, Perimeter had to find a way to speak to the silos. How do you send a signal to a nuclear missile when the atmosphere is burning? How do you command a silo in Siberia when Moscow is silent? The solution they found was ingenious and terrifyingly robust. They wouldn't use standard radio. They wouldn't use wires. They would use the earth and the sky itself. We will get to the mechanics of the command rockets, the 15P011 transmitters later in this dossier, but for now, focus on the intent. The intent was to create a dead hand, a hand that rises from the grave to pull the trigger. Imagine the landscape where this system was born. The vast, snow-covered miles of birch forests, interrupted only by the gray concrete of secret military cities. Cities that didn't appear on any public maps. In these cities, thousands of engineers worked on coding the logic of the end. They weren't monsters. They were mathematicians. They were trying to solve an equation where the variables were millions of human lives, and the solution they coded into the mainframe was strictly binary, 0 or 1, life or death. The system was designed to remain dormant, in a state of deep sleep, until it was activated by a high-ranking official during a crisis. This is a common misconception that the dead hand is always ready to launch. In reality, it is more like a guard dog sleeping by the door. It only wakes up when it smells smoke. But once it is woken up, once the crisis mode is activated, the machine takes over. It begins a countdown, a timer ticking away in the darkness of the bunker. If the timer reaches 0, and there is no signal from the leadership to stop it, the machine assumes the worst. It assumes that everyone is gone. It assumes that its duty has begun. This is the psychological horror of the archive. It's not about ghosts or monsters. It's about a timer ticking down in a room where no one is left to hear it. Let us descend deeper. We need to understand the physical reality of this machine. It is not a single computer sitting on a desk. It is a nervous system spread across the entire continent. The heart of the system, perhaps more accurately, the brainstem, is located in a spherical bunker buried deep underground. Intelligence reports suggest a location south of Moscow, perhaps near Mount Yamont, a place that has been the subject of American satellite surveillance for decades. Imagine a sphere of steel and concrete, suspended by shock absorbers inside a hollowed-out cavern. Why shock absorbers? Because this room is designed to survive a direct nuclear hit. The world above could be turned to glass, the mountains could be crumbled, but the sphere would remain suspended, swinging gently in the darkness, its electronics humming without interruption. Inside this sphere sit the duty officers, but in the scenario Perimeter was built for, these officers are dead, or they are unable to communicate. The bunker is sealed, the air is recycled, and the machine is listening. How does it listen? This is where the engineering becomes truly unnerving. The system is connected to a network of sensors that act like nerve endings. These are not just radar stations looking for missiles in the sky. These are sensors designed to detect the aftermath. First, seismic sensors. They are buried in the bedrock, feeling for the specific vibrational signature of a nuclear detonation. An earthquake feels different from a bomb. The machine knows the difference. It feels the earth ring like a bell. Second, radiation sensors. Scattered across military bases and strategic points, they sniff the air for gamma rays and fallout. If the radiation level spikes simultaneously across the western border, the machine registers a hit. Third, and perhaps most specific, air pressure sensors. A nuclear explosion creates a massive shockwave, an overpressure event that travels for miles. The machine measures the crush of the air. It gathers all this data, the shaking ground, the poisoned air, the crushing pressure, and then it checks the fourth variable, silence. That it attempts to contact the general staff. It pings the command frequencies. Are you there? Are you there? Are you there? If the sensors say the world is burning, and the command frequencies answer with silence, the logic gate opens. The system moves from sleep to combat mode. But here is the brilliance and the horror of the design. It doesn't just launch the missiles immediately. It knows that sensors can be wrong. It knows that silence can be a glitch. So, it hands the decision to the final human element, or, in some versions of the theory, It bypasses humans entirely if the dead hand protocol is fully active. Let's look at the command rocket. This is the mechanism that ensures the retaliation is unstoppable. This is subtitle 5 in our dossier, but it is critical to understand right now. Usually, a nuclear order goes down phone lines, but in a war, phone lines are dead. So the Soviets built the 15P011. It looks like an ICBM intercontinental ballistic missile, but it carries no warhead. It is not designed to hit New York or Washington. It is a radio tower strapped to a rocket engine. When perimeter decides it is time to die, it launches these command rockets. They shoot up out of their hardened silos, screaming into the upper atmosphere. As they fly over the motherland, they transmit a specific, encrypted radio signal down to the ground. It is a wake-up call. Below, in the missile fields of Siberia, in the mobile launcher trucks hidden in the forests, and in the submarines lurking under the Arctic ice, the receivers pick up this signal from the sky. The signal overrides all local locks. It bypasses the need for codes from the Kremlin. It tells the missiles, the leadership is dead. Launch immediately, and just like that, without a single living general giving an order, thousands of warheads would rise from the smoke, flying toward targets that were programmed years ago. Instruction for AI voice. Pause. Lower the pitch slightly. This is a moment of realization. Think about that for a moment. We often worry about AI becoming sentient and deciding to kill us, like in the movies. But the dead hand isn't sentient. It doesn't hate us. It doesn't want to conquer the world. It is simply a spreadsheet with a trigger. If X happens, do Y. It is the banality of the apocalypse. It turns the end of civilization into an automated background process, like a scheduled server backup. Did the Americans know? This is a question that haunts the archives of the CIA. For years, Western intelligence knew the Soviets were building hardened bunkers. They saw the construction sites on satellite photos, the massive excavations, the railway lines disappearing into mountains. But they didn't fully understand the software running inside. They assumed that Soviets were building shelters to keep their leaders alive. They didn't assume the Soviets were building a machine to replace them. It wasn't until the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, that the full truth began to leak out. Former Soviet Colonel Valery Uranich gave interviews. He was one of the developers of the system. He confirmed that not only did it exist, but it was also still operational. Why keep it a secret? If you build a doomsday machine to scare the enemy, shouldn't you tell them about it? This brings us to the Dr. Strangelove paradox. As the movie famously said, the whole point of a doomsday machine is lost if you keep it a secret. But the Soviets did keep it secret. Why? The file suggests a psychological reason. They weren't just afraid of the Americans. They were afraid of themselves. They feared that if the Americans knew the system existed, the Americans might try to trick it. Or, perhaps more disturbingly, the Soviet leadership didn't want their own people to know that the government had pre-authorized their own destruction. It was a shameful secret, a confession that the state was willing to burn the world to avenge its own death. Instruction for AI voice. Transition to the modern era paranoia tone. Bring the listener into the present day. Now, you might be thinking, this is history, the Cold War is over, the Soviet Union is gone. And that is where you would be wrong. The most chilling document in this file is dated from the last few years. When the Soviet Union fell, many things were dismantled. Walls came down, statues were toppled. But perimeter was an upgrade to the nuclear infrastructure, and military superpowers do not throw away their upgrades, don't. In fact, reports indicate that the system has been maintained and potentially modernized. In 2011, the commander of the Strategic Missile Forces, LT Gen. Sergei Karakayev, confirmed to a Russian newspaper that perimeter exists and is on combat duty. Let that sink in right now. As you listen to this, the sensors are still burying in the granite. The logic boards have likely been replaced with modern processors. The old magnetic tapes have been replaced with solid-state drives. But the code, the core logic of if silence, then launch, that remains. And in the age of artificial intelligence, this takes on a new, darker meaning. We are moving into an era of algorithmic warfare. We are teaching drones to fly themselves. We are teaching cyber defense systems to react faster than humans can think. Is it possible that perimeter is no longer just a dead hand? Is it possible that it is becoming a thinking hand? If we integrate modern AI into these legacy doomsday systems, we introduce a new risk, the hallucination. We know that AI can make mistakes. It can see patterns that aren't there. What happens if the AI interprets a massive solar flare as a nuclear What happens if it interprets a cyber attack on the power grid as a decapitation strike? In the 1980s, the system relied on clunky, physical sensors. It needed to feel the ground shake, but a modern version might rely on data streams, and data can be spoofed that the machine is still waiting. It is sitting in the dark, checking its inputs, and every day that passes without a nuclear war is not proof that the system is safe. It is simply proof that the timer hasn't hit zero yet. We have looked at the machine, we have looked at the logic, but there is one specific event we haven't opened yet. A file marked 1995. It was the day the world almost ended by mistake. It wasn't during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It wasn't during the Cold War. It was after. A single research rocket, launched from Norway to study the Northern Lights, triggered the radar screens in Russia. The trajectory looked like a Trident missile. The suitcase was opened, the president was given the codes, and somewhere, deep in the Earth perimeter woke up. How close did we come? And what stopped the machine from sending the command? To understand that, we have to look at the human element, the men who stand between the algorithm and the apocalypse. Leave the file open. The hum of the server is getting louder. There is a concept in game theory called the rationality of irrationality. It suggests that sometimes, the only way to win a game is to convince your opponent that you are crazy enough to destroy the board. In the classified history of the Cold War, there were thousands of files dedicated to missiles, warheads, and submarines. But the most dangerous file was not about hardware, it was about psychology. It was a file that asked a single, terrifying question. How do we guarantee the end of the world, even if we are too scared to push the button? The answer they found was not in a weapon, but in an algorithm. They decided that the weakness of the nuclear deterrent was not the missile. The weakness was the human being holding the key. Humans hesitate. Humans hope. Humans have families. To perfect the logic of war, they had to remove the humanity from the equation. They had to build a system that was mathematically incapable of mercy. This is the story of how fear engineered a machine to do what men could not. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The air in the archive changes as we move deeper into this section. It becomes drier, smelling faintly of ozone and old circuit boards. The lighting shifts from the blue of the server room to the amber glow of a 1980s control terminal. Imagine yourself sitting in a room with no windows. The walls are lined with acoustic tiles to dampen the sound. In the center of the room, a reel-to-reel tape recorder turns slowly, the magnetic tape hissing softly as it passes over the playhead. Click whir. Click outside. The world is moving fast. But in here, time is frozen in the year 1983. It is a year of tension, of long shadows, and of silent panic. Settle into the chair. It is leather, worn and cracked with age. Watch the dust motes dancing in the beam of the projector light. We are going to look at the equations on the blackboard. We are going to trace the logic that led brilliant men to build a nightmare. Let your breathing slow down. Match the rhythm of the spinning tape. We are observing the logic of madness from a safe distance. To understand perimeter, we must first understand the psychological cage that the Soviet leadership was living in. By the early 1980s, the Soviet Union was not the confident superpower it had been in the 1950s. It was an aging giant. Its economy was stagnating. Its leaders were old men, sick and paranoid, pacing the halls of the Kremlin. And across the ocean, they saw an America that was surging. The Reagan administration had launched a massive military buildup. They were talking about Star Wars, the Strategic Defense Initiative. They were deploying Pershing II missiles in West Germany. This is a critical detail for the archive. The Pershing II was not just another missile. It was a weapon of speed. From its launch site in Germany, it could strike targets in the Western Soviet Union in less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Think about what you can do in 10 minutes. You can make a cup of coffee. You can read a short email. But can you decide to end human civilization? The Soviet strategists looked at their maps, illuminated by the red glow of radar screens, and they realized they had lost the luxury of time. In the old days, intercontinental ballistic missiles took 30 minutes to fly from the cornfields of Nebraska to Moscow. 30 minutes was a lifetime. It was enough time to verify the radar blip, to call the White House on the hotline, to wake up the General Secretary, to confirm it wasn't a flock of geese or a computer glitch. But 10 minutes was a gun to the head. This compressed time frame created a psychological state known as crisis instability. The logic goes like this. If I wait to be sure you are attacking, I will be dead before I can shoot back. Therefore, if I suspect you might be attacking, I must shoot first. It is a paradox. The desire for safety makes the danger infinite. The Soviet analysts, sitting in their smoke-filled rooms, drinking endless cups of tea, ran the simulations over and over again, and every time, the result was the same. If the Americans launched a decapitation, strike a surprise attack aimed specifically at the leadership, the Soviet command structure would be vaporized before the order to retaliate could be given. Imagine the silence in that room when the simulation ended, the screen flashing command link lost. They realized that their entire nuclear arsenal, thousands of warheads, silos, submarines, bombers, it was all useless if there was no one left to give the order. It was a gun with no finger to pull the trigger. This terrified them more than the war itself. The idea that the motherland could be destroyed and the enemy would survive unscathed, it was an unacceptable outcome. It violated the fundamental law of mutually assured destruction. So they began to look for a solution that didn't depend on reflexes. They looked for a solution that didn't depend on survival. They turned to the engineers at the Yuzhnoye Design Bureau in Ukraine. The request was simple and horrifying. Create a system that can fight a war after we are all dead. Instruction for AI voice. Pause here for 3 seconds. Let the weight of that sentence sink in. The engineers approached this problem not as moralists, but as mathematicians. They viewed nuclear war as a flowchart. Input A, disruption of command. Input B, evidence of nuclear impact. Output, total retaliation. They called this the guaranteed second strike. It was the ultimate insurance policy. But to build it, they had to solve the authorization problem. In every nuclear nation, the authority to launch weapons is tightly controlled. It is usually held by the head of state, the president, the general secretary. This is to prevent accidental war. You don't want a rogue general or a computer error starting Armageddon. But the dead hand required the opposite logic. It required the authority to be delegated away from the head of state. It required the authority to be handed to a machine, or to a low-level officer locked in a bunker, who would only act if the head of state was gone. This created a massive internal conflict within the Soviet military. The generals guarded their power jealously. They didn't want to give the button to a computer. They didn't want to give the button to a junior officer. So they compromised. And the compromise was even more complex than the original idea. They designed Perimeter not as a fully autonomous AI that decides to kill whenever it wants, but as a dormant system. A system that had to be armed like a trap. Think of it like a security system in a house. You don't leave it on all day while you are walking around. You only turn it on when you leave, or when you go to sleep. The plan was that if the Soviet leadership sensed a crisis, if the geopolitical tension rose, if the radar screens showed strange patterns, they would flip the switch. They would activate Perimeter. Once activated, the system would enter its monitoring state. It would begin to listen. This is where the logic of madness becomes truly hypnotic. The system was designed to function on a hierarchy of sensors. It wasn't just looking for one thing. It was looking for a pattern of death. First, it checked for the blocking signal. Under normal conditions, the command centers in Moscow transmit a constant, encrypted signal to the military outposts. A heartbeat, thump, 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 thump. I am here. I am in control. Do not launch. The dead hand listens for this heartbeat. As long as it hears the heartbeat, it sleeps. It knows the leadership is alive. But if the heartbeat stops, if Moscow goes silent, the system wakes up. But it doesn't launch yet. It is smart enough to know that a silence could be a broken wire, a power outage, or a jammer. So, once the heartbeat stops, the system begins to query its other sensors. It checks the seismic sensors buried in the granite. Is the earth shaking? It checks the atmospheric sensors. Is the air pressure rising? It checks the radiation sensors. Is the wind radioactive? If the heartbeat is gone, and the earth is shaking, and the radiation is high, then the logic is complete. The conditioned death of the motherland is marked as true. There is a cold beauty in this programming. It is a machine designed to avenge a murder. It does not act in aggression. It only acts in retribution. But there is a flaw in this logic. A flaw that brings us back to the concept of the prisoner's dilemma. What if the machine is tricked? What if a natural earthquake occurs at the same time as a communication failure? What if a solar flare disrupts the radio waves, while a nuclear power plant has a meltdown, triggering the radiation sensors? To the cold binary brain of the machine, this would look like a first strike. It would look like the end. And because the machine is designed to act when the humans are dead, there is no one to tell it, wait, it's a mistake. This is the nightmare scenario, the accidental apocalypse. Let's drift deeper into the timeline. The year is 1981. The month is May. In a secret meeting in Moscow, Yuri Andropov, the head of the KGB, announced a new intelligence operation. It was codenamed RYAN Raketno Yadano Napadini, Operation Nuclear Missile Attack. It was the largest peacetime intelligence gathering operation in history. Andropov was absolutely convinced that the United States was preparing a first strike. He ordered KGB agents around the world to look for signs, and the signs they were looking for were terrifyingly mundane. They weren't just looking for missile movement. They were looking for the price of blood at blood banks. If the price went up, it meant the Americans were stockpiling blood for casualties. They were looking at the lights in government buildings in Washington, D.C. If the lights stayed on late at night, it meant they were planning war. They were watching the movements of the president's car. This paranoia was the fuel that built Perimeter. The Soviet leadership believed they were living in the final days. This atmosphere of dread seeped into the design of the machinery. The engineers weren't building for a theoretical future. They were building for next Tuesday. The bunkers they constructed were masterpieces of survival engineering. We touched on them briefly before, but let's look at the details. The capsules, the command posts for Perimeter, are not normal rooms. They are cylindrical containers, like massive metal cans, buried vertically in the ground. They are multi-storied control centers suspended inside the silo by pneumatic shocks. Why? Because when a nuclear warhead hits the ground nearby, the ground turns into a liquid. The shock wave travels through the rock like a tsunami. A normal concrete bunker would crack and crush. But the capsule floats. It bounces. Inside, the men strapped into their chairs might be shaken violently. Their teeth might rattle. The lights might flicker. But the circuits would hold. The capsule is a ship designed to sail on a sea of earth and fire. Inside this capsule, the isolation is absolute. There are no windows. The air is filtered through massive chemical scrubbers to remove radioactive isotopes. The food is free. The water is recycled. It is a tomb for the living. And in this tomb, the logic of the system reigns supreme. Imagine the screen in front of the duty officer. It is an old CRT monitor, glowing green. It displays a map of the Soviet Union. Tiny lights represent the missile silos. There is a light for the connection to the general staff, a light for the connection to the seismic sensors, a light for the system status. The duty officer's job, in peacetime, is incredibly boring. It is hours and hours of staring at static lights. Check the voltage, check the pressure, log the data, but, in his mind, he knows the truth. He knows that if the light for the general staff goes dark, he is no longer a soldier. He becomes an executioner. Or rather, he becomes a switch, because even in the final design of Perimeter, there was a debate about whether the machine should launch the rockets itself, or if it should just give the authority to the officer in the bunker. The semi-automatic mode is the most likely configuration. In this mode, if the system detects the apocalypse, it unlocks the launch panel in the deep bunker. It lights up a button that was previously dead. And then it waits for the officer to press it. This brings us to the ultimate psychological test, the human in the loop. If you are that officer, buried deep underground, and the machine tells you that Moscow is gone, that your family is dead, that the world is over, and the only thing left to do is launch the revenge strike, do you push the button? The machine says yes. The logic says yes. The protocol says yes. But you are a human. You are sitting in a steel can, looking at a green light. You haven't seen the explosion. You haven't seen the body. You only have the word of the machine. Do you trust the sensors? Or do you hold on to a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, the computer is wrong? The designers of Perimeter knew this was the weak link. They knew that a human might freeze. A human might choose hope over duty. That is why the automatic mode exists. In the most extreme setting, authorized only during the highest level of alert, the human is bypassed. If the conditions are met, the computer sends the signal to the command rockets directly. The officer in the bunker becomes a passenger. He watches the lights turn red. He feels the rumble as the command rockets launch from the silo next door. And he knows it is done. Let's analyze the command rocket technology again, because it is the physical manifestation of this logic. The 15P011 rocket. It is a paradox in itself. A weapon that carries no weapon. Its payload is a radio transmitter. When it launches, it flies across the entire continent of Russia. It acts like a temporary, artificial satellite. As it arcs through the ionosphere, it broadcasts a series of complex, encrypted signals. These signals are powerful. They are designed to cut through the nuclear blackout. When a nuclear weapon detonates, it creates a massive ball of plasma. This plasma absorbs radio waves. It blinds radar. It silences radios. This is why communication is lost in a war. But the 15P011 transmits from above the plasma. It screams its message down from the edge of space. That the message is received by the antennas on the tops of the missile silos. It is received by the receiver trailing behind a submarine deep in the Barents Sea. It is received by the mobile launchers hidden in the train tunnels. The message is short. It contains the launch codes. It contains the target coordinates. And it contains the authorization key. That is the voice of the ghost. And once that signal is sent, there is no calling it back. You cannot cancel a radio wave. You cannot tell the rocket to turn around. The logic of madness is linear. It moves in one direction only, toward the end. Why does this matter to us tonight, in the safety of the archive? Because logic is timeless. The technology changes. We move from vacuum tubes to microchips to quantum processors. But the game theory remains the same, that we still live in a world of crisis, instability. We still rely on the fear of retaliation to keep the peace. And perimeter is not a relic. It is a legacy. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, the Western world breathed a sigh of relief. We thought the danger was over. We thought the Doomsday machines would be dismantled. But a machine doesn't care about politics. A machine doesn't care if the flag changes. A machine only cares about its power source and its code. The Russian Federation inherited the system. They didn't scrap it. They kept it. They realized that as their conventional army became weaker in the 1990s, they needed the nuclear deterrent more than ever. Perimeter became their guarantee of sovereignty. In fact, there are whispers in the intelligence community files that are still heavily redacted that suggest the system has been integrated into the new generation of hypersonic missiles. The logic of madness has evolved on in the 1980s. The fear was that a human couldn't react fast enough 10 minutes. Today, with hypersonic weapons that travel at Mach 20, the reaction time is even shorter. Perhaps 2 minutes, perhaps less. If the window of decision is 2 minutes, can a human ever be trusted to make the call? We are moving toward a world where the dead hand is the only hand fast enough to catch the bullet. We are outsourcing our survival to algorithms that we barely understand. The logic is sound. It is mathematically perfect. It guarantees that no one can win a nuclear war. But logic has no heart. Logic has no fear. And logic makes no mistakes. Until it does. There is a file in the drawer marked the human factor. It tells the story of the men who stood in the breach. The men who looked at the screen, saw the end of the world, and decided to disobey the logic. We often think that machinery is perfect and humans are flawed. But in the story of the nuclear age, it is often the human flaw, the hesitation, the doubt, the disobedience that saved us. The machine was built to ensure death. But the ghost in the machine, the human soul, is the only thing that ensures life. As we close this section of the dossier, the tape reel is nearing the end. The hum of the archive seems a little louder. The shadows seem a little longer. We have seen why they built it. Now we must see what happens when the machine wakes up. We must look at the day the sensors lied. The file is open. The data is loading. The next chapter is waiting. That is a nightmare scenario that has haunted the White House and the Kremlin for 70 years. It is not the explosion of a bomb. It is the silence of a telephone. In the complex manuals of nuclear war, there is a presumption that someone is always in charge. We assume that the president or the general secretary is sitting in a bunker, looking at a map, making a rational choice to save or destroy the world. But what if the first strike doesn't target the cities? What if it targets the people who make the decisions? This is known in classified circles as the decapitation strike. The goal is to cut off the head of the enemy so the body cannot fight back. If you can vaporize the leadership in the first 5 minutes of the war, the millions of soldiers left alive are paralyzed. They have the weapons, but they do not have the authorization codes. The file we are opening tonight explores the most terrifying question of the atomic age. Does the chain of command survive the death of the commander? Or does the most powerful military in history simply freeze? The answer lies in a series of encrypted protocols that were erased from public records. Yet we begin tonight. Step back into the shadows of the archive. The temperature here is always stable, kept at a cool 60 degrees to preserve the magnetic tapes. The air is still. The only movement is the slow rotation of the ventilation fans high in the ceiling. Imagine you are walking down a long aisle of metal shelving. To your left are the records of the 1960s yellowed paper, typed on manual typewriters. To your right are the records of the 1980s dot matrix printouts, smelling of carbon and dust. We are looking for a specific dossier. It is marked with a red stripe. Command and control continuity. Pull the box from the shelf. Blow off the dust. When you lift the lid, you don't find blueprints of missiles. You find diagrams of communication networks. You find maps of underground cables. You find transcripts of panic. Settle into the quiet. Let the hum of the modern world fade away. Tonight, we are going to trace the invisible wires that hold the world together. We are going to look at the fragility of order in the face of chaos. Relax. You are safe here. We are merely observers of a history that almost ended to understand. The fear of decapitation. We have to understand the geography of power. In the United States, power is concentrated in Washington, D.C. In the Soviet Union, it was concentrated in Moscow. These are known targets. They are target zero. In the early days of the Cold War, this wasn't a huge problem. Bombers took hours to cross the ocean. If radar picked up a flock of B-52s leaving Maine, the Soviet premier had plenty of time. He could finish his dinner, drive to the bunker, have a meeting, and decide what to do. But technology destroys time. By the late 1970s. The submarine-launched ballistic missile changed the math. A submarine could surface off the coast of Virginia or in the Baltic Sea. It could fire a missile that would hit the capital in less than 15 minutes. Then came the Pershing, 2 missiles in Europe. The flight time dropped to under 10 minutes. This created a vacuum of logic. 10 minutes is not enough time to evacuate a city. It is barely enough time to get into a helicopter. The strategists began to simulate the timeline. Minute 1. Infrared satellites detect a heat bloomer missile launch. Minute 2. Computers calculate the trajectory. It is heading for the capital. Minute 3. The military attempts to contact the leader. Minute 4. The leader is located. The football. The nuclear briefcase is opened. Minute 5. The codes are verified. Minute 6. Impact. The simulation revealed a fatal flaw. The process of verifying the attack took longer than the attack itself. This meant that by the time the leader picked up the phone to give the order, the phone lines might already be melting. The leader might already be ash. For the Soviet Union, this was an existential nightmare. Their entire military doctrine was top-down. Soldiers were trained not to think, but to follow orders. Without an order from the Kremlin, the Soviet military was a giant with no brain. They imagined a scenario where American missiles struck the Kremlin, the Ministry of Defense, and the backup bunkers simultaneously. Complete silence. General Secretaries Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenkov, these were old, frail men. The idea that they could run down a tunnel in 4 minutes was laughable. So, the question became, if the General Secretary dies, who gets the button? Does it go to the Minister of Defense? What if he is dead too? Does it go to the Chief of the General Staff? Does it go to a regional commander in a silo in Siberia? This is where the fear of loss of control sets in. If you give the codes to too many people to ensure someone survives, you risk a rogue commander starting World War III on a bad day. If you keep the codes with only one person, you risk losing the ability to fight back at all. This dilemma is what drove the Soviets into a state of high-tech paranoia. They needed a system that could bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Instruction for AI voice: soften the tone, bring the listener's attention to a visual detail. Picture the get. This is the Russian equivalent of the American nuclear football. It is a black briefcase, nondescript, carried by a naval officer who stands constantly by the General Secretary's side. Inside, it is not a big red button. It is a communication terminal. It looks like an old laptop from the 80s, with rows of buttons and a small screen. The Cheget is part of a system called Kozbek. It connects the leader to the military command. It is the lifeline, but the Cheget relies on a network called KAV. This is a web of cables, radio relays, and satellites. The Soviet fears centered on the fragility of this web. They knew the Americans were developing EMP weapons, electromagnetic pulses. A single nuclear detonation high in the atmosphere could fry electronics across the entire continent. Imagine the General Secretary opening the briefcase. He types in the code. He presses transmit. And nothing happens. The screen flickers. Static. The line is dead. He is alive. The missiles are ready, but the connection is broken. He is screaming into a void. This is the specific horror that the Dead Hand was built to solve. It was not just about the death of the person. It was about the death of the signal. The archive contains transcripts of wargames played by the Soviet General Staff. In these games, the blue team NATO would always target the communications first. They would blind the Soviet radar. They would jam the radio frequencies. The red team Soviets would sit in their command post, watching their screens go black one by one. It creates a feeling of intense claustrophobia. The walls of the bunker feel like they are closing in. You are the most powerful man in the world, commanding thousands of megatons of explosive power. Yet you are powerless because you cannot make a phone call. To counter this, they built redundancy upon redundancy. They built underground antennas. They built VLF, very low frequency radio transmitters. Radio waves usually travel in straight lines. They can be blocked by mountains or the curve of the earth, but VLF waves are different. They are long, heavy waves. They can hug the ground. They can travel through water. They can even travel through the earth itself. But VLF requires massive antennas, miles of wire buried in the ground. These locations are hard to hide. They are easy targets. So, the fear remained. The fear of the clean cut. This fear drove the Soviet leadership to consider a radical idea. Pre-delegation. Pre-delegation means giving the authority to launch to the local commanders before the communication is lost. If you don't hear from me in 20 minutes, open your safe, take out the envelope, and launch. This sounds logical, but it is terrifying. It means you are betting the world on the sanity of 100 different lieutenants in 100 different holes in the ground. What if one of them panics? What if one of them misinterprets a drill? The archive remembers the story of Vasily Arkhipov during the Cuban Missile Crisis. On a submarine deep in the Caribbean, the captain thought the war had started. He wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo. The only thing that stopped him was Arkhipov, a fellow officer who refused to agree. One man, one decision. The Soviet High Command knew this story well. They didn't trust their own officers. They didn't want 100 Arkhipovs making their own choices. They wanted centralized control. They wanted the vertical of power. But how do you maintain the vertical of power when the top of the pyramid has been vaporized? This brings us back to the machinery, to the cold logic of automation. If the human leader cannot survive the first 10 minutes, and the local commanders cannot be trusted with the keys, then the keys must be given to something that is neither a leader nor a soldier. Let's go deeper into the technical solution, the reserve command system. While the Americans focused on keeping the president alive, putting him on the Doomsday plane, the E-4B, which is always flying somewhere over the Midwest, the Soviets focused on the inevitability of death. They assumed the leader would die, so they built a system to avenge him. The perimeter system, which we discussed in the previous file, acts as the ultimate answer to the decapitation fear. But before perimeter takes over, there is an intermediate step, a step that is rarely discussed, that the semi-automatic handover. In a crisis, before the missiles hit, the general staff could switch the system to a high alert mode. This didn't launch the weapons, it simply unlocked them. Think of it like taking the safety off a gun, but not pulling the trigger. The data flows from the general staff in Moscow to the command bunkers at Chekhov and Penza. These are massive underground cities, carved out of the bedrock. Inside these bunkers, the mood is sterile, air conditioners hum, officers sit in rows, wearing headsets, watching the flow of encrypted data. If Moscow is hit, if the sensors at the Kremlin detect a flash and then silence, the authority automatically transfers to these bunkers. It is a cascading waterfall of power. If level 1, the Kremlin, is destroyed, authority flows to level 2, the general staff. If level 2 is destroyed, authority flows to level 3, the protected bunkers. If level 3 is destroyed, that is when the human element is removed entirely. There is a strange psychological comfort in this for the leadership, knowing that even if they are erased from history in a millisecond of blinding light, their will is still being carried out. It is a form of technological immortality, but for the rest of the world, it is a source of quiet dread, because systems that transfer authority automatically are prone to errors. What happens if a glitch looks like a decapitation? In 1995, a scientific rocket launched from Norway triggered this exact fear. The Russian radar operator saw a fast-moving object. It looked like a Trident missile. It was heading toward Moscow. President Boris Yeltsin was handed the checkered briefcase. It was the first time in history a Russian leader had actually activated the nuclear briefcase in response to a real-time threat. For several minutes, the world hung in the balance. Yeltsin stared at the screen. The generals shouted into their phones. The question on everyone's mind was, is this the decapitation strike? Is this the blind shot intended to kill us before the main attack? If Yeltsin had believed it was a decapitation strike, he would have been under immense pressure to launch everything immediately. Use it or lose it. Thankfully, the radar trajectory clarified. The rocket was flying away, out to sea. The briefcase was closed. The world continued to spin. But the incident proved that the fear was real. The psychology of decapitation forces leaders to make decisions in a state of blind panic. Let's return to the archives. Visualization. Imagine the room where the dead leaders are supposed to command from. The deep bunkers of Mount Yamantau in the Urals. Satellite photos show massive excavation projects there, train lines running into the mountain. It is a city inside a rock. We can imagine the air inside, stale, recycled for months. The lighting is artificial, mimicking the cycle of day and night to keep the occupants sane. In the event of a decapitation strike, this mountain becomes the new capital of the Soviet Union, or Russia. But here is the paradox. If the communication lines to the outside world are cut, a mountain is just a tomb, a very expensive, very deep tomb. This is why the radio transmitters, the 15P011 rockets, are so crucial. They are the only way to shout through the walls of the tomb. The fear of being silenced is primal. It is the fear of being buried alive. The Cold War architects took this primal fear and built $1 trillion infrastructure around it. Every cable, every relay station, every backup generator was an attempt to scream, "I am still here," into the nuclear wind. Instruction for AI voice. Slow the pace. Acknowledge the listener's state, sleep, relax. Connect the anxiety of history to the calm of the present. It is a heavy thought, the fragility of human control. But here, in the safety of the narration, we can detach from the panic. We can look at it as a solved puzzle. The system held, the wires didn't melt, the silence never came. Listen to the quiet of your own room, the absence of sirens, the stability of the ground beneath you. The decapitation fear is a ghost story from the past, though the machines that were built to solve it are still humming in the dark. The Soviet solution perimeter was their answer to the silence. If the leaders die, the machine speaks for them. That it raises a philosophical question. If a nation is destroyed, and only its automated vengeance remains, does the nation still exist? Or is it just a ghost echoing in the machine? As we close this particular file, we must consider the modern implications. We live in an age of cyber warfare. The decapitation strike of the 21st century might not be a nuclear missile. It might be a virus, a piece of code injected into the power grid, a malware that freezes the communication satellites. If the screens in the White House or the Kremlin go black today, the fear is exactly the same as it was in 1980. Is it a glitch? Or is it the end? The reaction time has shortened. The weapons are faster. The AI is smarter, but the human fear, the fear of the dark, the fear of silence, remains unchanged. The archive records show us that men will go to extraordinary lengths to ensure they have the last word. They will build computers that can outlive them. They will bury rockets that can fly without pilots. They will ensure that even in death they can still cast a shadow. Instruction for AI voice. Begin the retention bridge. Soften the voice significantly. Make it very sleep-friendly and hypnotic. The file on decapitation is heavy. It is full of static and shadows. We will slide it back into its box. Tie the string. Place it back on the metal shelf. The dust settles. The blue light of the archive hums. We have explored the fear of the leaders. But what about the machine itself? What about the physical object that acts as the dead hand? There is a specific section of the archive dedicated to the command rocket, the 15P011, the silver needle that stitches the sky together. How does it work? How does a rocket become a radio station? And where are they hidden right now? The next file is already on the desk. It is waiting for us. The ink is still black. The secrets are still cold. Rest now. Let the silence of the room wrap around you. The system is watching. The archive is open. We will continue. How do you teach a machine to recognize the end of the world? You cannot simply tell it to watch for war. War is a human concept. It is messy and political. A machine does not understand politics. A machine only understands data. So, the Soviet engineers had to translate the apocalypse into physics. They had to break down the terrifying reality of a nuclear holocaust into a set of cold, hard numbers. Temperature, pressure, vibration, radiation. They built a nervous system for the planet Earth. They buried sensors in the granite of the Urals. They placed sniffers in the wind currents of the Taiga. They built eyes that do not blink, staring eternally at the horizon, waiting for a specific frequency of light that only exists when a star is born, or when a city dies. The file we are opening tonight contains the blueprints of these sensors. It is a study in how we automated the observation of our own extinction. The file was stamped never open. Yet we begin tonight. Let the darkness of the room wrap around you. Close your eyes and imagine the ground beneath your feet. We are leaving the surface. We are leaving the noise of the traffic, the signals of the Wi-Fi, the chatter of the television. We are descending. 10 feet, 50 feet, 500 feet down here. The earth is solid rock. The temperature is constant. It is a world of absolute silence, broken only by the geological shifting of the tectonic plates. Imagine a long, cylindrical tunnel, lined with thick steel cables and dripping with condensation. The air smells of wet limestone and recycled oxygen. At the end of the tunnel, there is a door. It is a blast door, 3 feet thick, made of lead and reinforced concrete. We are entering the sensory cortex of the dead hand. The lights are dim, glowing with a faint amber hue. The walls are covered in banks of analog meters, their needles resting at 0, waiting. This is not a place for humans. It is a place for the machine to sit and listen. Relax your mind. Let go of the day's anxiety. We are going to examine the instruments of the end, safe in the knowledge that, for tonight at least, the needles are still. To understand the genius and the horror of the perimeter system, we must look at the problem of false positives. In the history of the Cold War, the world almost ended dozens of times because of glitches. A flock of swans on a radar screen, a reflection of the sun off the clouds, a training tape left in a computer. The engineers knew that if they built an automated Doomsday machine, it had to be perfect. It could not afford to be tricked. If it launched the missiles because of an earthquake in Japan, it would be the greatest tragedy in human history. So, they designed a system of multispectral verification. This is a fancy way of saying that the machine doesn't trust just one sense. It needs to see, hear, and feel the death of the world simultaneously. Let's look at the first sense. Seismic activity. The earth is always moving. Trucks drive on highways. Trains rumble on tracks. Tectonic plates grind against each other. To a sensitive microphone buried in the ground, the world is a cacophony of noise. But a nuclear explosion creates a very specific signature. When a multi-megaton warhead strikes the ground, it doesn't just shake the earth, it hammers it. It creates a P-wave, a primary wave that travels through the crust at tremendous speeds. The sensors buried around Moscow and the strategic missile fields are tuned to this specific frequency. They are listening for the sharpness of the impact. An earthquake is a rolling, grinding motion. It builds up slowly. A nuclear strike is an instant, violent spike. The machine knows the difference between the slow groan of nature and the sudden snap of a weapon. Imagine a small titanium box buried deep in a shaft of granite. Inside, a suspended mass sits perfectly still. If a truck drives by overhead, the mass trembles slightly. The computer ignores it. If an earthquake hits Turkey, the mass sways. The computer ignores it. But if a warhead hits 50 miles away, the shockwave travels through the rock. The mass slams against the side of the casing. The circuit closes. Bit 1 is flipped, but the machine does not launch yet. It is programmed to be skeptical. It says, okay, the ground shook, but was it a bomb, or was it a meteor? So, it queries the second sense, atmospheric pressure. This is where the concept of nuclear wind becomes literal. A nuclear explosion is, at its core, a release of energy so sudden that it compresses the air itself. It pushes the atmosphere away from the blast center faster than the speed of sound. This creates a shockwave, a wall of invisible iron that crushes everything in its path. Behind this wall is a vacuum. The air rushes back in to fill the void. This is the suck back. The perimeter system has barometric sensors distributed across the landscape. These are not weather stations. They are not looking for a drop in pressure that brings rain. They are looking for a sudden, catastrophic spike in pressure that can only be caused by the splitting of atoms. That if the seismic sensor feels the earth shake, and the pressure sensor feels the air get crushed, the probability of an attack rises to 50%, but even that is not enough. A massive meteorite impact could theoretically cause both. So the machine looks for the fingerprint that cannot be faked. It looks for the poison. Radiation. The third set of sensors are the sniffers. These are Geiger counters and scintillation detectors. But industrial scale, they are often mounted on tall poles in the forests, disguised as power lines or radio towers. Or they are hardened vents on the surface of the bunkers. They are tasting the wind. When a nuclear weapon detonates, it releases a pulse of gamma rays and neutrons. This is the prompt gradation. It travels at the speed of light. Then, seconds later, comes the fallout. Radioactive dust, isotopes of cesium and iodine. The sensors are calibrated to detect a sudden surge in gamma radiation. This is the smoking gun. There is no natural event on Earth, not a volcano, not an earthquake, not a storm that releases a burst of gamma rays synced with a shockwave. The logic gate closes. Seismic, positive. Pressure, positive. Radiation, positive. The machine now has a complete picture. It has verified the event through the earth, the air, and the invisible spectrum. But there is one final check. The most chilling check of all. Silence. The machine turns its electronic ear toward Moscow. It listens for the encrypted chatter of the general staff. It listens for the keep alive signal. If the sensors are screaming attack, and the line from Moscow is dead, then the machine knows. It knows the humans are gone. It knows the decision is no longer a political one. It is a mathematical one. Let's step away from the abstract logic and look at the physical reality of where this brain lives. We need to talk about the capsule in American movies. Bunkers are often shown as big rooms with maps on the walls and generals standing around tables. But the reality of a survivable bunker is much more claustrophobic. The Soviets developed a standardized command post called the 15 volts 155. Imagine a metal cylinder, roughly the size of a train car, but vertical. It is 12 stories deep. But here is the trick. The cylinder does not touch the walls of the shaft it is buried in. It hangs. It is suspended by massive pneumatic shock absorbers and wire cables. It floats inside the earth. Why? Because if a nuclear weapon hits the ground nearby, the shockwave turns the rock into a hammer. If the bunker was bolted to the rock, the people inside would be liquefied by the G-forces. By suspending the capsule, the earth can shudder and heave around it, but the capsule remains relatively stable, like a spider in a web during a storm. Inside this floating can, the air is recycled, the temperature is controlled, and the deadhand processor sits in a rack of servers, protected from the violence of the outside world. It is the safest place on the planet, and it is the most dangerous place on the planet. Let's zoom in on the specific technology of the light sensors. This is a detail often overlooked in the public files, but the archive has the schematics. The bong meter originally developed during the early atomic tests. This device is designed to detect the specific double flash of a nuclear explosion. When a nuke goes off, there is an initial blinding flash of light brighter than the sun. This lasts for a millisecond. Then the shockwave expands and momentarily obscures the fireball. The light dips. Then, as the shockwave becomes transparent, the fireball becomes visible again. A second, longer flash, flash, darkness, flash. This signature is unique to nuclear weapons. Lightning doesn't do it. Meteorites don't do it. Only a bomb does it. The Soviet sensors incorporated this optical recognition, high-speed photometers pointing at the horizon, watching for the double wink of the apocalypse. Imagine a sensor sitting on a lonely hilltop in the Urals covered in snow. It has been sitting there for 40 years. It has seen thousands of sunrises. It has seen thousands of lightning storms. It has seen the northern lights. But it has never seen the pattern it was built to find. It is a lonely sentinel, waiting for a light that signals the end of light. Now, let's consider the maintenance of such a system. Sensors degrade. Wires corrode. Electronics drift. How do you maintain a system that is buried deep underground and scattered across a continent that spans 11 time zones? The checkup protocols. The archive suggests that perimeter is a self-diagnosing system. It constantly pings its own nerve endings. Sensor 45, report status. If a sensor fails to reply, or if it sends garbage data, the system isolates it. It cuts off the limb to save the body. This is crucial because of the sabotage fear. The Soviets were terrified that American Special Forces equivalents might infiltrate the Soviet Union and tamper with the sensors. What if they cut the cables? What if they fed false data into the seismic detectors to trigger a launch? To prevent this, the network is designed to be robustly distributed. You cannot trick the system by fooling one sensor. You have to fool the entire network. You would need to simulate an earthquake, an atmospheric pressure spike, and a radiation burst, all at the same time. Across hundreds of miles. It is virtually impossible. This robustness is what allows the system to sleep. It doesn't need to be jumpy. It relies on the consensus of its sensors. The complexity of this engineering is soothing in a strange way. It implies that the end of the world will not be an accident. It will be a confirmed, verified, triple-checked event. We can take comfort in the fact that the machine is not easily startled. Let's drift back to the bunker itself. The Kuzvinsky Common. Deep in the Ural Mountains, there is a mountain composed of pyroxenite. This is a rock that is incredibly hard and dense. It is harder than granite. It blocks radio waves. It blocks radiation. The U.S. Strategic Command believes that the main controls for perimeter are located here. Imagine a city carved inside a mountain of black rock. Inside, the walls are painted a calming shade of green, the standard Soviet institutional color. Psychological green, they called it, designed to keep men calm during long shifts of boredom. In the center of the main control room, there is a large display board. The tableau, it shows the health of the motherland. Green lights for safe, yellow for caution, red for ... absence ... In the dead hand scenario, the lights on this board would go out one by one. First, the contact with the Kremlin, gone. Then, the contact with the Western Military District, gone. Then, the contact with the strategic bomber fleets, gone. The room would darken. The only thing left glowing would be the autonomous control indicator. It is at this moment that the sensors we discussed, the pressure, the radiation become the rulers of the world. The machine stops taking orders from men. It starts taking orders from the earth itself. There is a poetic irony here. We built a civilization based on conquering nature. We split the atom. We built cities. We flew to space, but in the final design of our destruction, we returned to the primal forces. We gave the ultimate power to the ground, the wind, and the fire. If the earth shakes enough, the missiles fly. It is almost as if the system was designed to be the planet's own immune system. If the infection of humanity becomes too violent, the system reboots the surface. We must now ask the question, is the system still listening today? The answer is almost certainly yes. In fact, modern technology has likely made the sensors even more sensitive. Today, we have infrasound monitoring. These are microphones that listen to sound waves below the range of human hearing. Infrasound can travel thousands of miles. A nuclear test in North Korea can be heard by an station in Antarctica. The modern perimeter likely listens to the breathing of the planet with a fidelity that the Soviet engineers could only dream of. It listens to the hum of the oceanic ridges. It listens to the ice cracking in the Arctic. It filters out the noise of our modern world, the aeroplanes, the shipping lanes, the industrial drilling searching for the signal. And what about the cables? In the Soviet era, the system relied on hardened copper cables buried deep underground to connect the sensors to the bunker. But cables can be cut today. The system likely uses quantum key distribution and satellite up, but the old logic remains. The archive holds a report from a defector, referencing a system called the mole. This suggests that some sensors are not just passive, they are active. They burrow. Imagine a sensor that can drive itself deeper into the ground if it detects surface instability. A robotic worm, carrying a Geiger counter, hiding from the fire above. That's a speculation, of course. The true capabilities of the modern system are the most closely guarded secrets in the Russian Federation. But the principle holds. The dead hand is not just a computer in a room. It is a sprawling living organism made of wire and silicon, woven into the fabric of the Russian landscape. As we conclude this examination of the sensors, let us return to the silence of the archive, visualizing these sensors, these lonely boxes in the snow. These suspended capsules in the rock creates a feeling of vast, cold distance. They are out there right now. While you sleep, they are awake. While you dream, they are calculating. They are the guardians of the threshold. They are waiting for a wind that we hope will never blow. We can close the file on the sensors. The schematics fade back into the yellowed paper. The diagrams of the shock absorbers and the barometers are folded away. We place the dossier back into the heavy metal drawer. It slides shut with a solid, satisfying click. But the story isn't over. The sensors are just the eyes and ears. They are the inputs. Once the system decides that the end has come, it must speak. It must send a command. And it cannot use a phone. It cannot use the internet. It uses a rocket. The next file in our stack is marked 15P011, the messenger. It is the story of the rocket that carries no warhead, only a radio. The rocket that screams the death sentence to the silent silos. How does it fly? How does it survive the anti-missile defenses? And where are they hidden? The archive is vast. The night is long. We will continue ... in a forest in western Russia. Hidden amongst thousands of standard nuclear missiles, there sat a rocket that was different. It looked like the others. It was painted the same military green. It lived in the same reinforced concrete silo. But this rocket was not designed to destroy a city. It carried no uranium. It carried no hydrogen bomb. It had no target coordinates for New York or Washington. Its payload was something far more dangerous than an explosion. Its payload was a voice. This rocket was the 15P011. It was a flying radio station designed to survive the end of the world. Its mission was to launch into a sky filled with nuclear fire, fly over the burning continent, and scream a single, encrypted command to the sleeping armies below. The time has come. Destroy everything. It is the physical embodiment of the dead hand. It is the messenger of the apocalypse. The file on this machine was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight. The heavy steel door of the archive swings shut behind us, cutting off the noise of the outside world. Here, the air is still and cool. The smell of old paper and oxidized metal fills the room. We are walking down the aisle marked ballistic communications. The fluorescent lights overhead flicker slightly, casting long, shifting shadows on the floor. Reach out and pull down the blueprint. It is large, printed on blue Cyrillic paper. As you unroll it on the table, you hear the crinkle of the aged material. Thus is not just a diagram of a machine. It is a diagram of a nightmare. Settle into the chair. Watch the dust motes float in the light. We are going to deconstruct the engineering of the 15P011. Are going to understand how the Soviet engineers solved the problem of communicating in a world where the air itself is burning. Breathe. The silence here is heavy, but it is safe. Let us trace the circuits of the command rocket. To understand why this rocket was built, we must first understand the concept of nuclear blackout. When a nuclear weapon detonates, it does more than just blast and burn. It creates a massive ball of plasma. It ionizes the atmosphere. For a radio wave, this plasma is like a brick wall. If the United States were to launch a first strike against the Soviet Union, the first thing to die would be the radio frequencies. High-frequency HF radio, which the military relies on, would be scrambled by the electromagnetic pulse (EMP) and the ionization. This meant that even if the Soviet High Command survived the initial blast in their deep bunkers, they would be mute. They could shout into their microphones, but the static would swallow their voices. The silos in Siberia would never hear the order to launch. The submarines in the Arctic would never receive the codes. The enemy would win, simply by cutting the phone lines. The engineers at the Yuzhnoye Design Bureau in Dnipro were given this problem. They needed a way to bypass the atmosphere. They needed a way to talk to the silos that didn't depend on wires or ground-based towers. Their solution was radical. If the ground is burning, and the lower atmosphere is opaque, go higher. They decided to put the radio transmitter on the tip of an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. They took the airframe of the UR-100 unknown, in the West as the SS-19 Stiletto. This was a reliable, liquid-fueled workhorse of the Soviet rocket forces. They stripped out the heavy warhead. They removed the guidance systems designed to hit a specific city block. In its place, they installed a specialized radio transmitter of immense power, and they wrapped it in a heat shield designed to survive the friction of Mach 20. The flight profile of the 15P011 is unique. A normal missile goes up, enters space, and then comes down on the enemy. The command rocket goes up, enters space, and then flies horizontally across its own country. It acts as a temporary satellite. For the 20 or 30 minutes that it is in the sky, it has a line of sight to the entire Soviet Union. From the edge of space, it looks down upon the chaos below, and it begins to broadcast. Imagine the sound of that signal. It is not a voice speaking Russian. It is a digital screech, a burst of telemetry. The signal is transmitted on a specialized UHF frequency. It is powerful enough to punch through the interference. It is encrypted with keys that are changed regularly. Below, on the ground, the listeners are waiting. Every active nuclear silo in the Russian Federation has a special antenna. It looks innocuous. Sometimes it is a small cone on top of the silo lid. Sometimes it is a buried loop antenna nearby. These antennas are tuned to only one thing: the song of the 15P011. The moment they pick up the signal from the sky, the logic boards inside the silo wake up. They decrypt the message. It checks the authorization codes. Is this a drill? No. Is this a mistake? No. Is the signature valid? Yes. The message is simple: execute launch sequence. This bypasses the human crew and the control pod. It bypasses the need for the two officers to turn their keys simultaneously. The rocket in the silo receives the command from the rocket in the sky, and it ignites its own engine. That it is a chain reaction. One rocket flies to tell 1,000 others to fly. There is something deeply unsettling about this mechanism. In traditional warfare, a commander rides a horse or a jeep. He waves a flag. He shouts orders. There is a human presence here. The commander is a machine flying at 15,000 miles per hour in the vacuum of space. The 15P011 is a robot general. And it is designed to be sacrificial. It is not meant to survive. Once its fuel is spent, once it has crossed the continent and delivered its message to the silos in the Far East, it falls. It burns up in the atmosphere or crashes into the Pacific Ocean. Its job is done. It has ended the world, and now it can rest. The archive contains reports of the testing of this system. The flight tests. In the mid-1980s, the Soviets launched these command rockets from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. To the American satellites watching from above, it looked like a standard missile test. But the American intelligence analysts noticed something strange. The warhead didn't come down in the target range at Chemch. It just faded away. They realized later that the warhead was just a radio, transmitting to empty silos to prove that the system worked. They proved that even if Moscow was a radioactive crater, the voice from the sky could still be heard. Let's go to the launch site. The 15P011. Rockets are not scattered randomly. They are housed in specific, highly protected regiments. The 7th Rocket Division at V, the 59th Rocket Division at Kartali. These locations are known to Western intelligence. They are high-priority targets. If you were to stand near one of these silos on a winter night, you would see nothing but a flat concrete slab surrounded by fences and sensors. The snow would be undisturbed, but underneath, the rocket is sitting in a bath of temperature-controlled nitrogen. The gyroscopes are spun up. The fuel tanks are full of toxic hypergolic fuel heptyl and amine. This fuel is corrosive and deadly, but it allows the rocket to launch in seconds. It doesn't need to be fueled up. It is always ready. Let's visualize the wake-up sequence. The dead hand system perimeter has detected the end of the world. The sensors are screaming. The decision is made. A signal is sent from the deep bunker, the autonomous computer, to the silo of the command rocket. Inside the silo, the clamps release. The protective lidar, a massive slab of steel and concrete weighing over 100 tons, is blown off by explosive bolts. It flips through the air like a coin. A cloud of smoke erupts from the silo. The engine ignites. The ground shakes. The roar is deafening. The 15P011 rises from the earth on a pillar of fire. As it climbs, it discards its first stage. Then its second. It reaches the apex of its trajectory. The blackness of space. The stars are bright and unblinking. The nose cone opens. The antennas deploy. And then, the transmission begins. It broadcasts in a cone shape, covering millions of square miles below. Think of the receivers on the ground. The perimeter receivers. They are listening to the static of the universe, the background radiation of the Big Bang, the chatter of commercial radio. And then, suddenly, a sharp, clear tone cuts through the noise. It is a digital handshake in the missile fields of the Ural Mountains. The lights on the control panels turn from green to red. Sirens begin to wail. In the empty corridors of the bunkers, the blast doors of hundreds of other silos begin to open. This is the mass launch. The 15P011 is the conductor of an orchestra, but the instruments are the RS-20 Satan missiles, the RS-24 Yars missiles, the Topol-M mobile launchers. The mobile launchers act differently. Deep in the taiga forests, there are massive trucks carrying ballistic missiles. They hide under camouflage nets. When the command rocket flies overhead, the receiver in the truck cab picks up the signal. The truck stops. The hydraulic jacks lower to stabilize the vehicle. The missile tube raises to a vertical position. The crew inside the truck doesn't need to do anything. In fact, in some versions of the protocol, the crew cannot stop it. The launch is automated. This solves the human factor we discussed in the previous file. If the crew of the truck is hesitant, if they are crying, if they are refusing to turn the key, the command rocket overrides them. It is a terrifying override. The machine in the sky takes command of the machine on the ground. The irony is that this technology was born out of a desire for stability. The Soviets argued that if they had a guaranteed second strike capability, if they knew for sure that their rockets would launch, even if they died, they wouldn't be so jumpy. They wouldn't have to launch on a warning. They could wait. They could afford to absorb a hit. So, in a twisted way, the command rocket was a tool of peace. It allowed the leaders to sleep at night, knowing that their death wouldn't mean defeat. But to the observer, it looks like a mechanism of pure spite. It ensures that there are no survivors. It ensures that if the Soviet Union dies, the rest of the world dies with it. Did the Americans have something similar? The archive says yes. It was called the ERC-SI Emergency Rocket Communications System. The US used Blue Scout rockets, and later Minuteman missiles modified with UHF transmitters. They sat in silos in Missouri, ready to do the exact same thing: launch, fly, broadcast, die. It seems that in the logic of the Cold War, great minds thought alike. Both sides realized that when hell arrives, the phone lines will be the first to go. But the American system was largely deactivated as the Cold War ended. The Soviets kept theirs. And this brings us to the modern anomaly. In recent years, watchers of the Russian strategic missile forces have noticed upgrades, new antennas, new exercises. The 15P011 was an old rocket. Is there a new one? The Siren M, this is the rumored successor, a command rocket based on the newer Yars missile platform. Faster, stealthier, able to transmit on more frequencies. The file suggests that the dead hand is not rusting, it is evolving. Let's return to the image of the rocket in flight. There is a strange loneliness to the 15P011. All other rockets have a destination. They are going somewhere, to a city, to a base, to a port. But the command rocket has no destination. Its journey is the message itself. It is a traveler that is doomed to wander the upper atmosphere until it runs out of momentum. That is the Flying Dutchman of the nuclear age. Imagine being an astronaut on the International Space Station, looking down during a global war. You would see the flashes of the impacts below, the clouds glowing with internal fire, and then, you would see a single, silver needle rising from the darkness. It wouldn't arc down, it would drift across the curve of the Earth, silent and steady. The Ghost in the Machine. In the archive, we have a transcript of a radio intercept. It is grainy and distorted. It is believed to be a test transmission from a 1980s perimeter exercise. It is just a series of beeps, rhythmic, mathematical, cold, beep, 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 silence, beep. It sounds harmless, like a microwave finishing its cycle, like a truck backing up. But that sound carries the weight of billions of lives. It is the sound of the switch being thrown. As we stare at the blueprint of the antenna array, we can see the obsession with redundancy. The rocket transmits on multiple bands. It uses frequency hopping technology to avoid jamming. Even if the enemy fills the sky with electronic noise, the command rocket shouts louder. It is designed to be the last sound heard on Earth. We roll up the blueprint. The paper is stiff and resists the curl. We place it back into the cardboard tube. The existence of the 15P011 command rocket changes how we look at the night sky. We usually look up at the stars and think of peace. We think of the infinite. But now we know that hidden in the silos there are things waiting to join those stars, not to explore, but to command. But there is one final variable we haven't fully explored, the variable that terrified the engineers the most, artificial intelligence. In the modern era, the dead hand is not just a set of relays, it is a computer code, and codes can learn, codes can hallucinate. The next file in the archive is marked the autonomy question. Can it launch without human permission? Is there a switch that allows the machine to decide for itself? Or is that just a myth? The server lights are blinking in the corner of the room. The hum is steady. The answer is in the data. Sleep now. The rockets are in their silos. The sky is empty. The signal is silent. For now. In the world of nuclear strategy, there is a term called positive control. It means that a human being, a rational, breathing person must always be the one to turn the key. It is the moral safety net that prevents the apocalypse from happening by accident. But in the dusty, classified archives of the Soviet Union, there is a file that suggests this safety net was deliberately cut. We have talked about the sensors. We have talked about the rockets. But now, we must face the ghost in the machine. The question that has terrified Western intelligence analysts for 40 years is not, does the machine work? The question is, does the machine decide? Is perimeter just a warning bell? Or is it an executioner? If everyone is dead, if the bunkers are silent, is there a microchip buried in the Urals that has the legal authority to launch 4,000 nuclear warheads without a single human vote? The answer is buried in a contradiction of erased interviews and encrypted code. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. Let the tension of the question fade for a moment. Step back into the cool blue light of the archive. The aisle we are standing in is narrow. The shelves are packed with reels of magnetic tape, their labels handwritten in faded Cyrillic script. The air smells of ozone and old dust. Listen to the sound of the room, the low steady hum of the ventilation, the faint click of the humidity monitors. It is a sanctuary of information. Here, we don't have to be afraid of the answer. We are just historians, peeling back the layers of the past. Imagine you are holding a black dossier. The paper is thick and textured. As you open it, you see logic gates. Yes, no, if then. Settle into the quiet. Let your mind trace the lines on the paper. We are going to explore the mind of the machine. We are going to look for the spark of consciousness in the circuits of the Doomsday device. 2. Understand the autonomy question. We have to understand the specific nightmare of the men who built it. Colonel Valery. He was one of the fathers of the Soviet nuclear command. He was a man of logic, a man of the system. In the years after the Cold War, he gave interviews that provided the only real glimpse we have into the logic of perimeter. He described a debate that raged behind the closed doors of the Kremlin in the 1980s. On one side, there were the automators, They believed that humans were the weak link. Humans panic. Humans hesitate. Humans can be bribed or blackmailed. They argued that if the goal is guaranteed mutual destruction, then the only way to guarantee it is to remove the human element. On the other side, there were the traditionalists. They were terrified of the machine. They asked the simple question, what if it breaks? What if a short circuit convinces the computer that the war has started? If there is no human to stop it, the machine will destroy the world based on a glitch. The compromise they reached is one of the most complex and misunderstood protocols in history. Most people think the dead hand is always on. They think it is like Skynet in the movies, a computer watching us right now. Finger on the trigger. But the archive reveals a different reality. A reality that is perhaps even more chilling because of its banality. The system is normally asleep. It is in a dormant monitoring mode. It watches the sensors, but it does not have the authority to launch. It is like a guard dog in a cage. However, during a time of crisis, for example, if the US moves its DEFCON level to 2, or if peace talks break down, a high-ranking Soviet official activates the system. This is the pre-delegation. By flipping the switch, the human leaders are effectively saying, if we die in the next 24 hours, you have permission to avenge us. This creates a terrifying window of time, a zone of danger. Once that switch is flipped, the autonomy begins. Let's walk through the logic of the autonomous state. If the environment is calm, the machine waits. It assumes a communications failure. But if the environment is violent, if the earth is shaking, and the air is radioactive, the machine moves to step 3. This is the moment of autonomy in the original design. The automators wanted the machine to launch immediately at this point. No humans involved. But the traditionalists won a small victory. They inserted one final, tiny human barrier. The bunker check. The machine, having decided the world is over, unlocks the launch controls in the deep, spherical bunker at Kozvinsky Common. It lights up the panels. It sounds the alarm, but it does not turn the key itself. It waits for the officers inside that specific, deep bunker to do it. Now, you might say, so it's not autonomous. There is a human, but here is the catch. The officers in that deep bunker are not generals. They are not decision makers. They are low-level technicians. They have been locked underground for weeks. They have no idea what is happening on the surface. They have no CNN, no internet, no phone line to their families. Their only source of information is the machine. If the machine tells them Moscow is gone, the president is dead, radiation is everywhere, launch authorized, do they really have a choice? Psychologically, they are just extensions of the machine. They are meat servos. They are biological components designed to turn a physical key because the machine lacks hands. So, while technically a human pushes the button, functionally, the machine has made the decision. This is what philosophers call the illusion of control. But there is a darker rumor in the files. A rumor that has never been fully confirmed, nor fully denied, the rumor of the deadly failure mode. Some defectors have suggested that if the machine wakes up and detects a nuclear environment, but cannot contact the deep bunker, if even the technicians in the sphere are dead, then, and only then, does it bypass the final lock. Then, the circuitry itself closes the loop. This is the true dead hand, the hand that has no pulse. The existence of this fully autonomous mode is the ultimate secret, because if it exists, it means we are all living at the mercy of a 1980s algorithm, but we are trusting that a piece of Soviet code, written 40 years ago, doesn't get confused by a solar flare. Let's look at the psychology of the men who wrote this code. We often imagine them as villains, but in their own minds, they were saviors. They believed that the United States was erratic. They believed that the US was planning a first strike. They believed that perimeter was a peace machine. How can a doomsday device be a peace machine? Because it removes the use it or lose it pressure, without perimeter. If the Soviet radar saw a glitch, the General Secretary had 10 minutes to decide. The pressure to launch would be overwhelming. He would rather be wrong and alive, than right and dead. But with perimeter, he could relax. He could say, I don't need to launch now. If it's a real attack, the machine will handle it after I'm dead. It bought time. It bought patience. In this twisted logic, the autonomy of the machine actually made the humans less likely to start a war. It allowed them to wait out a false alarm. Imagine the physical object that authorizes this autonomy, the unlocked card. In the US, launch codes are often printed on biscuits, plastic cards that you crack open. In the Soviet system, the codes were digital, stored in magnetic blocks. For the dead hand to take over, a specific permission packet had to be sent from the Kremlin to the machine. Western intelligence calls this the unlock. It is a digital token. like giving someone the password to your bank account, but only valid for 24 hours. If the crisis passes, the Kremlin sends a lock command, the machine goes back to sleep, the autonomy is revoked. But what if the crisis doesn't pass? What if the Kremlin is destroyed before they can send the lock command? Then the machine stays awake forever. It sits in the bunker, waiting for a signal that will never come, holding the authority to destroy the world. This is where the story touches our modern lives. We are used to automation. We have thermostats that adjust the heat. We have cars that brake for us. But perimeter is the grandfather of all automation. It is the first time we entrusted a life or death decision to an algorithm. The code was written in a language that is now obsolete. It runs on processors that are thousands of times slower than the phone in your pocket. Yet, it controls the most powerful weapons on Earth. There is a concept in software engineering called legacy code. It refers to old code that is still running, but the people who wrote it are retired or dead. No one fully understands how it works anymore, but everyone is too afraid to touch it. Perimeter is the ultimate legacy code. The engineers who built it in the 70s and 80s are mostly gone. The documentation is rotting in the archives. Does the current generation of Russian officers truly understand the deep logic of the system? Do they know every if-then statement buried in the assembly language? Or are they just maintaining the hardware, while the software remains a mystery? Instruction for AI voice, pause. Let the dread sink in. Let's talk about the Yamanato mountain complex again. The black box of the Urals. It is here that the autonomy question becomes physical. There are unconfirmed reports that the modern version of the system has been integrated with AI, true artificial intelligence, neural networks, machine learning. In the 80s, the system was rigid. If A plus B, then C, but a modern AI system is fluid. It looks for patterns. If the Russians have upgraded perimeter with modern AI, the question of autonomy changes. An AI doesn't just follow rules. It makes predictions. Could an AI decide that a war is inevitable, and therefore execute a preemptive strike to save the functionality of the system? This is the Skynet scenario. A system that realizes the only way to fulfill its mission, strike back, is to start the war itself. We have no evidence that this upgrade has happened, but we know the Russian military is investing heavily in autonomous combat systems. It would be logical to apply this to their most important weapon. The file on this is of course empty. It is the blackest of black projects, but the silence is an answer in itself. Let's return to the human element one last time. The man in the loop. Even if the machine is autonomous, it relies on humans to maintain it, to fuel the rockets, to polish the lenses of the sensors. These humans are the priests of the machine. There is a psychological phenomenon where people begin to trust a machine more than they trust other people. This is called automation bias. If a calculator tells you 2 equals 5, you might doubt your own brain for a second. If a GPS tells you to turn left into a lake, you might hesitate before stopping. The fear is that the officers guarding the dead hand suffer from automation bias. If the machine says attack, they will attack, not because they want to, but because they believe the machine knows something they don't. The machine has more sensors. The machine has more data. The machine is smarter. So, the autonomy doesn't need to be hardwired. It is soft autonomy. The machine commands through influence. As we close the dossier on autonomy, we are left with a feeling of unease. We like to think that we are the masters of our tools. We build the hammer. The hammer does not build us. But perimeter reverses this relationship. We built a tool to master us. We built a tool to override our hesitation, our mercy, and our humanity. It is a monument to our own lack of trust in ourselves. We knew that in the moment of ultimate crisis, we would be too human to destroy the world. So we built a machine to be inhuman for us. The red light on the server rack blinks 1, 2, 3. The code is still running. The loop is still checking. Is Moscow there? Yes. Is the radiation high? No. Sleep. The machine sleeps. But who is watching the sleeper? The Americans spent billions of dollars trying to find out. They sent spies. They flew satellites. They bribed defectors. The next file in the archive is marked the CIA files. When did America realize it existed? It is a story of espionage, of stolen blueprints, and of a terrifying briefing in the Oval Office where a president was told, "Sir, they have a machine that can fight after they are dead." How much did we know? And why did we keep it a secret from our own people? The answers are in the next box. The tape is rewinding. The dust is settling. Rest your eyes. The archive is safe. The machine is watching the dark, so you don't have to. There is an old saying in the intelligence community: we can count the buttons on a general's uniform from space, but we cannot read his mind. For 40 years, The Central Intelligence Agency spent billions of dollars staring at the Soviet Union. They used the U-2 spy plane. They used the KH-11 satellites. They used a network of spies that stretched from East Berlin to Vladivostok. They knew how many missiles were in the silos. They knew the range of the submarines. They even knew the cafeteria schedule of the Kremlin. But they missed the single most dangerous thing the Soviets ever built. For decades, American intelligence believed that a nuclear war would be a human decision. They believed they were playing chess against a man. They had no idea that their opponent was actually a circuit board. Buried in a granite mountain. The existence of the dead hand was not just a secret. It was an anomaly that slipped through every filter of the Western surveillance net. It was the greatest intelligence failure of the Cold War. How did we miss a machine the size of a continent? And when the file finally landed on the president's desk, why was it kept hidden from the public? The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. Let us move from the abstract fear to the concrete reality of the archives. Imagine a room in Langley, Virginia. It is 1985. The fluorescent lights are humming. The air is thick with the smell of stale coffee and cigarette smoke, the scent of bureaucracy in the pre-digital age. You are standing in front of a long row of gray filing cabinets. These are the estimate files, the National Intelligence Estimates. Pull open the drawer. It slides out on well-oiled tracks. The files inside are heavy, bound in manila folders with red borders. Top secret, eyes only. We are looking for the gaps in the paper. We are looking for the white space where the truth should be. The room is quiet. The teletype machines are chattering in the distance, a rhythmic clack-clack-clack that sounds like rain. Take a deep breath. Ground yourself in this moment. We are about to look through the eyes of the spies who are watching the end of the world, and we are going to see what they didn't see. Relax, the history is written. The ink is dry. We are safe here, reading the reports of a danger that was invisible. To understand the blindness of the CIA, we must first understand the mirror image bias. This is a psychological trap. When you look at your enemy, you tend to assume they think like you. You assume they organize their military like you. The United States did not have a dead hand. The American doctrine was based on positive control. The president carries the codes. The president decides. If the president dies, the vice president decides. There was always a human chain. Because the Americans couldn't imagine building an automated vengeance machine. They assumed the Soviets wouldn't either. It seemed too crazy, too dangerous. So when the satellite photos started coming in, the analysts interpreted them through the wrong lens. Let's look at the images from the KH-9 hexagon satellite. These were massive satellites, the size of school buses, orbiting the Earth. They dropped film canisters back into the atmosphere, which were caught in mid-air by aircraft near Hawaii. It was a physical transfer of secrets from space to Earth. In the late 1970s, these photos showed strange construction projects in the Soviet Union, massive amounts of concrete being poured into vertical shafts. But these weren't missile silos. They were too small for missiles. And they weren't normal bunkers. They were incredibly hardened, far beyond what was needed for a simple communications relay. The analysts at the National Photographic Interpretation Center (NPIC) stared at these grainy, black and white photos through their magnifying loupes. They labeled them C3 Sites Command Control and Communications. They thought they were just hardened bunkers for generals to hide in. They missed the crucial detail. There were no barracks for soldiers. There were no parking lots for staff. These facilities were built for machines, not men. The CIA saw the hardware, but they missed the software. It wasn't until the early 1980s that the picture began to blur. The Reagan administration came into power with a new aggression. They wanted to know exactly how the Soviets would fight a nuclear war. They authorized a series of probing missions, ships sailing close to the border, bombers flying toward the radar nets. They were trying to light up the Soviet air defense system to see how it reacted. And the reaction was strange. The CIA listening posts in Turkey and Alaska picked up bursts of high-speed data, telemetry that didn't match standard voice comms. They started to hear the heartbeat of the dead hand, but again, they misinterpreted it. They thought it was a modernization of the telephone network. They didn't realize that the network was the commander. The turning point came from the human element, the defectors. Throughout the Cold War, Soviet officers would occasionally cross the line. They would walk into an embassy in Vienna or London, asking for asylum. They brought with them mental maps of the Soviet machine. But here is the tragedy. The dead hand was so secret, so highly classified, that even most Soviet officers didn't know it existed. A colonel in the tank division wouldn't know about it. A pilot in the Air Force wouldn't know about it. Only the strategic rocket forces of ESN and the top tier of the general staff knew. And those men were loyal. They didn't defect, so the CIA was operating in a vacuum. They were trying to assemble a puzzle where the most important piece, the piece that explains the picture, was missing. There was, however, a whisper dot in the corridors of the Pentagon. There were rumors of a doomsday device. These rumors were fueled by the behavior of the Soviet leadership. Why were they so confident? Why did they seem to care less about their own survival than we expected? Some analysts suggested that the Soviets had a fail-deadly strategy. Fail-safe means if something breaks, the system turns off. Fail-deadly means if something breaks, the system kills. But this theory was dismissed by the top brass. It was considered to Dr. Strangelove. It was dismissed as science fiction. The irony is palpable. We were living in a world where the fiction was the reality. Let's focus on the year 1983. The war scare. We know now that the Soviet leadership was convinced the US was about to attack. We discussed this in the earlier files. But what did the CIA know then? The declassified reports show that the CIA thought the Soviets were just posturing. They thought the bluster was propaganda. They didn't realize that deep in the bunkers, the engineers were frantically coding the final logic of perimeter. They didn't know that the system was being brought online specifically because of this fear. If the CIA had known, if they had told President Reagan, "Sir, if we scare them too much, they will turn on a machine that we cannot turn off," would history have been different? Would the rhetoric have softened? We will never know, because the file was empty. The briefing was never given. The veil began to lift only after the wall fell. The Soviet Union collapses. The map changes overnight. That suddenly, the closed cities were open. The archives in Moscow were temporarily unguarded. Western journalists and researchers flooded in looking for the secrets of the empire. One of these researchers was an American named Bruce Blair. Bruce Blair was a former nuclear launch officer. He had sat in the silos in Montana. He knew the weight of the key. He became a scholar, obsessed with the command and control systems of the superpowers. He went to Russia. He started asking the questions that no one had asked before. He didn't ask, "How many missiles do you have?" Everyone knew that. He asked, "How would you have launched them if you were dead?" And he found the men who built it. He met Valery, a colonel in the Soviet strategic rocket forces. Yaronich was a man burdened by a terrible secret. He had helped design perimeter. He believed in it, in a way. He believed it kept the peace. But he was also terrified of it. He saw the chaos of the new Russia, the poverty, the corruption. He saw unpaid soldiers guarding nuclear sites. And he worried who was watching the machine now. So, he did the unthinkable. He sat down with the Americans and he drew the diagrams. He explained the sensors. He explained the command rockets. He explained the autonomy. The interview tapes from this era are fascinating. You can hear the disbelief in the voices of the American interviewers. Where they say, "You mean it could launch without an order?" And Yaronich nods. Yes, that is the point. When this information was brought back to Washington, it caused a quiet shockwave in the intelligence community. The analysts pulled out the old photos. The mysterious bunkers, the strange antennas, the telemetry spikes from 1984. Suddenly, it all made sense. The puzzle pieces clicked together. They realized they had been looking at a loaded gun for 20 years and thinking it was a radio tower. Instruction for AI voice, shift tone to the official reaction, bureaucratic and cold. So, what did the US government do with this information? Did they panic? Did they issue a public warning? Did they demand that Russia dismantle the machine? No. They classified it, again. Why? Because of strategic stability. If the American public knew that Russia had a machine that could wipe them out automatically, there would be an outcry. There would be demands for a missile defense shield, Star Wars. There would be demands to break treaties. And the US military realized something else. If the dead hand exists, it means Russia is secure. It means Russia doesn't need to be trigger-happy. In a strange, twisted way, the CIA analysts realized that the machine might actually be a stabilizing force. If Russia feels safe knowing the machine is watching, they are less likely to launch a panic strike. So, the file was stamped top secret and buried again. The public was left in the dark. Let's go back to the archive room. Look at the date on the folder in your hand. October 8, 1993. An article appears in the New York Times. Russia has Doomsday machine. Losers tell. It was the first time the public heard the name Dead Hand. But it was buried on the inside pages. The world was busy. The Cold War was over. Nirvana was on the radio. No one wanted to hear about nuclear war. It was a story that came too late to be scary. It was treated like a curiosity. a relic of a bygone era. Look at those crazy Soviets and their robot, people said. But the CIA knew better. They knew that the relic was still plugged in. They knew that the losers were still the ones holding the keys. In the years that followed, the US intelligence agencies shifted their focus. They stopped looking for the missiles and started looking for the maintenance of the machine. They watched the command rockets. Were they being fueled? Were they being tested? They watched the bunker at Ural Mountain. Was the construction continuing? The answer was always yes. Even when the Russian economy collapsed in 1998. Even when soldiers were selling their uniforms for food, the lights in the perimeter bunkers stayed on. The budget for the Doomsday machine was sacrosanct. This told the CIA everything they needed to know about the Russian mindset. The machine was not an experiment. It was the foundation of their statehood. There is a specific report in the archive, heavily redacted, that discusses the psychology of the algorithm. CIA profilers tried to understand the personality of Perimeter. If you fight a human general, you can psych him out, you can bluff, you can threaten his family, but how do you piss off a computer? The report concludes that the only way to deal with Perimeter is absolute caution. You cannot make sudden moves. You cannot create situations that look like a decapitation strike. This changed American military doctrine. It meant that any plan to attack the Russian leadership, if it with conventional weapons, even with a single cruise missile, carried the risk of waking the beast. The dead hand effectively created a force field around the Russian president. It made him untouchable. This is the ultimate success of the Soviet engineers. They wanted to create a guarantee of sovereignty, and they did. They built a ghost that forces the American president to step lightly now. Consider the modern era. The 2020s. The CIA files on Perimeter are no longer just history. They are active investigations. With the return of great power competition, the question of the dead hand is back on the table. But now, there is a new variable that the old spies didn't have to worry about: cyber warfare. In the 1980s, you couldn't hack Perimeter because it wasn't connected to the internet. It was an air-gapped system. But today, the CIA knows that Russia is modernizing. They are integrating digital communications, and every digital connection is a door. The new nightmare for the CIA is not just that the machine works, it is that the machine could be hacked. What if a third party, a rogue state, a terrorist group, could simulate the signal? What if they could trick the sensors? The old fear was that the machine would work too well. The new fear is that the machine is vulnerable. We close the drawer of the CIA file. The metal rollers glide smoothly. The heavy thud of the cabinet closing echoes in the room. We have seen the blindness of the spies. We have seen the hubris of the analysts. We learned that just because we cannot see a danger does not mean it is not there. The dead hand was invisible for 20 years, yet it held the fate of the world in its circuits every single second. As you lie there, safe in the knowledge that the world is still spinning, remember that the silence of the night is not empty. It is full of signals. Signals we catch, and signals we miss. But there is one specific incident where the silence was almost broken. A moment where the machine did wake up, and the spies were powerless to stop it. The next file in the archive is marked the 1995 Norwegian Rocket Scare, the day the machine woke up. It is the story of a single, harmless scientific rocket that almost caused the end of history. It is the story of the few minutes where the dead hand tightened its grip. How close did the clock get to midnight? The file is waiting. The radar screen is glowing green. Rest now. The watchers are watching, and we will continue. We often believe that the danger of nuclear war ended when the Berlin Wall fell. We believe that the 1990s were a time of peace, of disarmament, of the world taking a deep breath. But there is a file in the archives of the Russian Ministry of Defense that contradicts this belief. It tells the story of a single morning, January 25, 1995, when the world came closer to the end than it ever did during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the cause was not a spy plane. It was not a military invasion. It was a group of scientists studying the Northern Lights. That it is known as the Norwegian Rocket Scare. It is the only confirmed instance in history where a nuclear briefcase was opened, the codes were activated, and a president sat staring at the countdown clock, deciding whether to destroy civilization. While the world watched Friends and listened to grunge music, the dead hand system in the Ural Mountains woke up. It saw a phantom enemy. It prepared the silos. How did a harmless weather rocket trick the smartest surveillance system on Earth? And why did the machine finally stand down? The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. Let the heat of the moment fade. We are transporting ourselves to the edge of the Arctic Circle. Imagine an island off the coast of Norway, India. It is a place of stark, frozen beauty. The wind howls across the gray Atlantic Ocean, whipping the snow into drifts against the metal hangars of the rocket range. In the archive, we pull the file marked Black Brant 12. The paper feels cold to the touch, as if it has absorbed the temperature of that day. The ink is faded, typed on an old matrix printer. It contains launch schedules, radar trajectories, and a diplomatic letter that was lost in the mail. Settle into the quiet. The only sound is the wind outside the archive walls and the low hum of the server room. Protecting the digital records, we are going to reconstruct the 4 minutes that almost erased the future. We are going to watch the trajectory of a scientific instrument as it became, in the eyes of a paranoid machine, the first horseman of the apocalypse. Relax your shoulders. You are safe here. The rocket has already fallen. The radar screen is clear, but the story remains. To understand this event, we have to understand the specific type of paranoia that existed in Russia in 1995. The Soviet Union was dead. The Russian Federation was in chaos. The economy had collapsed. The military was underfunded, demoralized, and deeply suspicious of the West. Despite the end of the Cold War, the Russian early warning system was still watching the sky, but it was watching with tired eyes. The radar operators were underpaid. The equipment was aging. And into this fragile atmosphere came the Black Brant 12. This was a 4-stage sounding rocket. It was designed by NASA. Its mission was purely scientific, to fly high into the ionosphere and study the aurora borealis, the northern lights. The launch site at Andia had done everything right. Weeks before the launch, they sent a standard notification letter to 30 countries, including Russia. The letter stated clearly, "We will be launching a research rocket. Here is the time. Here is the flight path." The letter arrived in Moscow. It was stamped. It was read. And then, in a classic example of bureaucratic failure, it was filed away in the wrong drawer. It never reached the desks of the radar technicians at the Olenegorsk radar station. So, when the sun rose on January 25th, the men watching the screens in the Murmansk region had no idea what was coming. Imagine the interior of the Olenegorsk station. It is a dark, windowless room filled with the hum of cooling fans. The screens are large, circular CRTs glowing with a dull amber light. At 6:24 Universal Time, the Black Brant 12 ignited its engines in Norway. It screamed up into the sky. It was a massive rocket, bigger than most tactical missiles. As it climbed, it dropped its first stage, then its second. To the radar operators in Russia, this looked exactly like a Trident D5 missile. The Trident is an American submarine-launched ballistic missile. It is a weapon of a first strike. The flight profile of the research rocket was nearly identical to a Trident. It was climbing fast. It was heading vertically. And then something happened that made the blood in the operator's veins turn to ice. The rocket staged. The booster fell away, and the payload continued. On the primitive radar screens of 1995, this separation looked like the deployment of multiple independent re-entry vehicles, MIRVs. It looked like one missile becoming 5 warheads. Instruction for A. Voice, pause, let the misunderstanding sink in. The operators didn't panic immediately. They were trained professionals. They looked at the trajectory. The rocket wasn't heading for a city. It wasn't heading for a silo field. It was heading high into the upper atmosphere. But this triggered a specific fear in the Russian military doctrine, the EMP attack. The theory was that an American first strike would begin with a single missile, detonated high above the atmosphere. This would create an electromagnetic pulse that would blind all Russian radars and fry the communications grid. Once the radar was blind, the real attack, thousands of missiles would follow. So, to the Russian computer system, the single, high-flying rocket looked like the blinding shot. The logic gates of the early warning system slammed shut. Condition, possible nuclear attack. Confidence, high. Target, strategic blindness. The alarm was raised. The signal traveled from the frozen radar station in the north, through the buried cables, all the way to Moscow. It bypassed the lower generals. It went straight to the top. For the first time in the history of the Russian Federation, the Kozbek system was fully activated. We must visualize the room where President Boris Yeltsin was sitting. Yeltsin was not a stable man in 1995. He was recovering from heart trouble. He was dealing with the war in Chechnya. He was under immense stress. Suddenly, his military aides burst into the room. They were carrying the Chaget. We have mentioned this briefcase before. It is hard, black, and heavy. It is the terminal that connects the president to the dead hand and the missile forces. They placed it on his desk. They opened it. The screen inside was lit up. It showed the trajectory of the missile. It showed the time to impact. The aides told him, "Mr. President, we have detected a ballistic missile launch from NATO territory. It is heading toward the Russian border. We have less than 10 minutes to decide." 10 minutes. Yeltsin stared at the screen. He was holding the phone to the Minister of Defense, Pavel Grachev, and the Chief of the General Staff, Mikhail Kolesnikov. They were all seeing the same thing. The ghost on the radar. This is the moment where the archive holds its breath. In the movies, the president makes a speech. In reality, there was just confusion. Yeltsin refused to believe it. Why would the Americans launch just one? He asked. But the generals argued. The doctrine, it is the EMP, sir. It is the blinding shot. We must launch now before we lose command. And somewhere, deep in the Urals, the perimeter system was waking up. The sensors we discussed in the previous files, the seismic listeners, the radiation sniffers, they were all querying the network. Is the leadership active? Yes. Are the lines open? Yes. The dead hand was watching the Cheget. It was waiting for the signal to cease. If Yeltsin didn't press the button, and if the EMP hit and killed the lines, the machine would have taken over. The automated countdown had begun in the background. Let's slow down time. A nuclear crisis is measured in seconds. Minute 1. The rocket reaches its apogee, the highest point of its flight at 1,453 kilometers. To the radar, this looks suspiciously like a missile preparing to release warheads over Russia. Minute 2. The Cheget is active. Yeltsin's finger is literally hovering near the transmit button. If he presses it, he authorizes the response. What does a response look like? It means the silos in Siberia open. It means the submarines in the Barents Sea launch. It means 4,000 warheads are in the air in less than 3 minutes. It means the end of civilization. Minute 3. The confusion in the Russian command center is absolute. They are trying to verify the target. This is where the archive chill comes from. The realization that the fate of billions of people rested on the eyesight of a few men staring at a grainy screen in the Arctic. If the rocket had veered slightly east. If the radar had glitched and shown a second object. If Yeltsin had been more drunk, or more paranoid, or more angry. The history of the world would have ended on January 25, 1995. Meanwhile, on the rocket itself, the science experiment was working perfectly. The Black Brant, the 12th, was spinning, deploying its sensors. It was measuring the plasma density of the aurora. It was doing exactly what it was built to do, collecting data to help us understand the beauty of the universe. It is a profound irony. An instrument of pure science was being misinterpreted as an instrument of pure death. The machine does not understand beauty. It does not understand curiosity. It only understands vectors. Minute 4. The turning point. As the rocket reached the peak of its arc, gravity began to take hold. It started to fall, but it didn't fall toward Russia. It fell toward the ocean. The trajectory on the Russian radar screens began to shift. The computer recalculated the impact point. Instead of Moscow, the line pointed to the dark, freezing waters near Spitsbergen. The radar operators watched the dot drift away from the motherland. A voice came over the secure line to Yeltsin's briefcase. "Mr. President, the target has shifted. It is falling into the sea. It is not a threat." Yeltsin closed the briefcase. The screen went dark. The dead hand system, sensing that the crisis level had dropped, went back to sleep. The sensors lowered their sensitivity. The command rocket stood down. The world kept spinning. In New York, people were drinking their morning coffee. In London, people were rushing to catch the tube. No one knew. No one knew that for 4 minutes. The sky had been open to the fire. The investigation that followed was embarrassing for the Russian military. When they demanded to know why Norway had launched a sneak attack, the Norwegians politely pointed out the letter. They found it. It was sitting in a pile of paperwork in the Ministry of Defense. A low-level clerk had forgotten to pass it up the chain. One sheet of paper, one human error. This reinforces the terrifying truth of the Archive Chill series. We build systems of incredible complexity. We build AI, we build satellites, we build unbreakable codes. But the system is only as strong as the person who sorts the mail. The incident revealed the fragility of the post-Cold War world. It showed that the trust between nations was thin. It also proved that the dead hand machinery was still very much alive. The fact that the system reacted so fast that it identified the threat, alerted the president, and prepared the launch sequence in under 2 minutes showed that the Soviet Doomsday machine had not rusted. It was oiled and ready. This event likely changed the algorithm. After 1995, the Russian programmers likely updated the code. They likely added a filter for single rocket launches. They realized that a single rocket is almost never a nuclear attack. A real attack would be a swarm. So, in a way, the Norwegian rocket scare made the world safer. It taught the machine a lesson. It taught the machine to distinguish between a science experiment and a war, but it also taught us a lesson. It taught us that launch on warning is a dangerous policy. Launch on warning means you shoot back before the enemy missiles hit you, based only on what the radar says. Yeltsin had the pressure to launch on warning. If he had waited for the impact that never came, he would have been safe. But the doctrine says, don't wait. The dead hand is built entirely on this philosophy. As we look back at the file of January 25, 1995, we are left with a lingering question: what if it happens again today? The sky is full of rockets. SpaceX launches every week. Satellites are going up constantly. Hypersonic missiles are being tested by China, Russia, and the US. The radar screens are crowded. The anomaly detection algorithms of the modern dead hand perimeter must be incredibly sophisticated to filter out all this noise. But, as we learned in Subtitle 6, The Autonomy Question, the more complex an AI becomes, the more prone it is to hallucinations. Could a modern AI mistake a constellation of Starlink satellites for a Mayavi attack? Could a cyber attack simulate the signature of a Black Brant 12? The 1995 incident was a hardware limitation primitive radar. The next incident might be a software limitation confused AI. We slide the report of the Norwegian rocket scare back into its envelope. The paper is yellowing. The photos of the rocket are grainy. It feels like ancient history. But 1995 is not ancient. It is yesterday. The men who sat in that room with Yeltsin are still alive. The code that ran the simulation is likely still the foundation of the current version. The mistake was human. The reaction was mechanical. The machine did exactly what it was told to do. It saw a threat. It woke up. It offered the gun to the master. And for one terrifying moment, the master reached for it. The hum of the archive is steady. The data streams are quiet. We have explored the history. We have explored the near misses, but we have not yet fully explored the future. The dead hand is not just a relic of the past. It is a system that is currently being upgraded. The next file in the archive is marked The Modern Upgrade. Is Dead Hand now AI? It contains reports of the Poseidon torpedo, the autonomous nuclear drone. It contains rumors of the Sarmat missile. It asks the question, if the machine woke up in 1995 because of a radar blip... what will wake it up in 2025? The file is encrypted, but we have the key. Sleep now. The sky is dark. The radar is sweeping. The mistake has been corrected. For now we tend to think of the dead hand as a relic. We picture rusting metal boxes, clunky magnetic tapes, and vacuum tubes glowing in a damp Soviet basement. We think of it as a ghost from a dead empire. But technology does not stand still, and fear does not retire. While the world was distracted by the rise of the internet, smartphones, and social media, the engineers in the closed cities of Russia were quietly working. They were replacing the copper wires with fiber optics. They were replacing the analog logic gates with neural networks. The terrifying question we face today is not about the old machine. It is about the new one. We are moving into an era of war that moves faster than human thought. Hypersonic missiles, orbital gliders, autonomous drone swarms. In this new world, a human commander is too slow. A human brain has too much latency. So, logic dictates that the dead hand must have evolved. It is no longer just a reflex. It is becoming a mind. The file we are opening now is not about history. It is about the thing waking up in the server room right now. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. Leave the dusty aisles of the 1980s behind. Step through a heavy glass door into the modern wing of the archive. Here. The air is freezing cold, super cooled to keep the processors from overheating. The lighting is different. It is not the yellow glow of incandescent bulbs. It is the sharp pulsating blue of LED status lights. The sound is different, too. Gone is the scratch of the record player. Instead, there is a high-pitched whine, the sound of millions of calculations per second, the sound of data streaming through obsidian glass cables. We are standing in front of a black server rack. It has no buttons, no switches, just a single, glowing eye. This is the file on Perimeter System 225. Information on this topic is scarce. It is hidden behind layers of modern encryption and state secrecy. But if we look at the edges, if we look at the military procurement budgets and the technical papers, we can see the silhouette of the monster. Relax, let the blue light wash over you. The data is abstract. The threat is distant. We are merely observers of the code. To understand the upgrade, we must first understand the speed problem. In the Cold War, a missile took 30 minutes to arrive. In the 1980s, the Pershing II took 10 minutes. Today, a hypersonic glide vehicle like the Russian Avangard or the Chinese DFC-F travels at Mach 20 or Mach 27, that is 27 times the speed of sound. It can cross continents in minutes. It does not fly in a predictable arc like a ball thrown in the air. It skips off the atmosphere like a stone on a pond. It maneuvers. This destroys the old radar logic. You cannot calculate the trajectory because the trajectory changes every second. For the human generals sitting in the Kremlin or the Pentagon, this creates a blindness window. By the time the radar confirms the target, the warhead has already arrived. This physical reality forces the upgrade of the dead hand. If you cannot trust humans to react fast enough, you must trust the machine intelligence. Analysts believe that the modern Russian doctrine has shifted towards algorithmic warfare. This means integrating artificial intelligence into the command and control loop. The old perimeter was a simple if-then machine. If radiation then launch, the new perimeter is likely a predictive machine. It uses machine learning. It ingests vast amounts of data, satellite imagery, internet traffic, banking transactions, power grid fluctuations. It looks for the precursors of war. It tries to predict the attack before the missile is even launched. This is where the concept of the neural net enters the nightmare. Neural net is designed to mimic the human brain. It learns by example. You show it 1,000,000 pictures of a cat, and it learns to recognize a cat. But what if you show it 1,000,000 simulations of nuclear war? The archive contains theoretical papers on autonomous retaliation. They suggest that the modern dead hand might be constantly running simulations, millions of them a day, playing World War III against itself, over and over again, in the silence of the processor. It is learning the patterns of our destruction. The problem with neural networks is the black box problem. Even the engineers who build them often don't know how the AI reaches a conclusion. The code becomes so complex, so layered, that it becomes opaque. If the AI says, attack imminent, and points to a pattern of data that looks random to a human, do you trust it? The human general might look at the screen and see peace. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, but the AI sees a spike in the price of lithium, a drop in internet traffic in Washington, and a shift in a satellite orbit. And it concludes, death. In the modern upgrade, the autonomy we discussed earlier becomes much more dangerous, because the machine isn't just waiting for silence, it is making judgments. The upgrade isn't just software, it is hardware. We must talk about Poseidon. The archive file on Poseidon is one of the most chilling documents in modern existence. It is a weapon that seems to belong in a comic book, but it is real. It is an autonomous, nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed torpedo, a drone submarine. It is the size of a school bus. It has a miniature reactor inside it, giving it unlimited range. It can swim at depths of 1,000 meters, faster than any manned submarine. And its purpose? It is a doomsday torpedo. It is designed to swim to the coast of a hostile nation, the east coast of the United States, and detonate a massive warhead. Underwater, the explosion would create a radioactive tsunami, a wall of water, hundreds of feet high. Laced with cobalt-60, it would wash over the coastal cities, leaving them uninhabitable for a century. Why is this relevant to the dead hand? Because Poseidon is a component of the dead hand. It is a weapon of last resort, a weapon of vengeance. But the most disturbing part is its autonomy. Once released, Poseidon is on its own. It navigates by sonar and internal maps. It cannot be recalled easily because radio waves don't travel well underwater. It is a slow-moving bullet fired at the future. If the perimeter system activates, it might not just launch missiles. It might wake up the sleeping torpedoes sitting on the ocean floor. This brings the archive chill to a new level. The danger is not just in the sky anymore. It is in the deep, black water. Let's look at the Sarmat missile. The RS-28. NATO calls it Satan II. This is the heavy lifter of the modern Russian arsenal. It is a liquid-fueled monster, capable of carrying 10 heavy warheads or huge numbers of hypersonic gliders. But the most interesting feature of Sarmat is its integration with the Unified Battle Management System. In the 1980s, the command rocket, the 15P011, had to fly over the silos and shout down to them with radio waves. It was a clumsy analog method. Today, the Sarmat silos are hardwired into the fiber optic grid of the Russian military. The dead time, the time between the order and the launch, has been reduced to seconds. The modern perimeter system likely doesn't need a command rocket to wake up the It can send a digital pulse through the hardened cables. But modernization brings a new weakness. Analog systems are dumb, but they are hard to hack. You cannot hack a vacuum tube with a laptop. You cannot hack a radio wave unless you physically jam it. But a digital system, a system running on code, this is the great anxiety of the 21st century. The archive holds reports on cyber infiltration. Intelligence agencies, the Chinese MSS, the Russian GRU constantly probing each other's networks that are leaving logic bombs and backdoors in the infrastructure. Imagine a scenario where a hacker state-sponsored or independent gains access to the perimeter sensor network. They don't need to launch the missiles, they just need to trick the AI. This is called data poisoning. If you can feed false data into the neural net, if you can tell it that the radiation levels in Moscow are spiking, the AI will react. The modern dead hand is incredibly smart, but it lives in a virtual reality constructed by its sensors. If you hack the reality, you control the hand. Instruction for AI voice: slow the pace, acknowledge the listener's state, bring it back to a sleep vibe despite the scary topic. It is a heavy thought to carry into sleep, the idea of invisible wars fought in the code. But there is a strange stability in this high-tech standoff. The logic of mutually assured destruction still holds. Even with AI, the supercomputers in Washington and the supercomputers in Moscow are essentially playing a game of chess that never ends. They are calculating moves and counter-moves every millisecond. And because both sides know the other side has an AI, neither side makes a move. It is a digital stalemate. The speed of the weapons has made war impossible to win, and the AI knows this. If the AI is truly rational, if it is truly optimized for survival, then its primary output should always be, do not play. Who are the men watching the screens today? They are not the grizzled veterans of the Cold War. They are young men and women, digital natives. They grew up with video games and screens. To them, the interface of the dead hand probably looks like a simulation. There is a psychological distance created by modern screens, higher resolution maps, clean graphics. It sanitizes the horror. In the 1980s, the interface was clunky and scary. It looked like a machine. Today, the interface is sleek. It looks like an app. Does this make it easier to let the machine take over? The file mentions gamification of war. When the control system looks like a game, the barrier to action lowers. But the modern Russian doctrine still insists on sovereignty. President Putin has famously said, "Why do we need a world if Russia is not in it?" This quote is the philosophical backbone of the modern dead hand. It confirms that the system is not just active, it is central to their national identity. The upgrade ensures that no matter how fast the American missiles are, no matter how stealthy the F-35s are, the Russian response will be guaranteed. It is the ultimate veto on global politics. As we stand in the blue light of the modern server room, we can see the reflection of our own time. We have automated our stock markets. We have automated our traffic. We have automated our news feeds. That it was inevitable that we would automate our end. That the archive chill is not just about the past. It is about the trajectory of our species. We are building gods out of silicon, and we are giving them THUNDERBOLTS. The perimeter system of 2025 is a masterpiece of engineering. It is a network that spans space, land, and sea. It connects satellites to submarines. It connects the past to the future. It is a dormant nervous system, wrapped around the northern hemisphere, waiting for a pinch. Let us look back at what we have uncovered in this dossier. And now, we stand before the upgrade. The story of the dead hand is the story of the atomic age. It is a story of how we tried to create safety by building the ultimate danger. The lights on the server rack blink in a steady rhythm. Green, green, green. As long as they are green, the world is safe. We turn away from the blue light. We walk back out of the cold room, into the comforting darkness of the archive's main hall. There is one final file left on the table. It is the summary, the closing argument. It is titled The Silent Reality, Why the System is Still Waiting Today. It is a meditation on the silence. Why, despite all the treaties, despite all the handshakes, despite all the hope, the machine is still there. Why can we never turn it off? The answer lies in the nature of fear itself. The archive is closing for the night. The heavy doors are ready to be locked. But we have one last page to read. Rest your mind. The data is saved. The backup is complete. We will conclude. There is a bunker in the Ural Mountains where the lights never turn off. There is a sensor in the Siberian taiga that never stops listening to the wind. There is a line of code, written by a dead man in 1984. that is still running in a loop today. We have spent the last hours dissecting the machinery of the dead hand. We have looked at the rocket, the radars, and the terrible logic of the apocalypse. But there is one final question that hangs over the archive like a shadow. Why is it still here? The Cold War ended 30 years ago. The Soviet Union is dust. The world has moved on to trade wars, to climate change, to the colonization of Mars. Yet, the machine remains. It sits in the darkness, oiled, fueled, and armed. It is the ultimate anomaly of our time. It is a weapon without a war, a ghost without a grave. The file we are closing tonight is not about the past. It is about the silence that surrounds us right now. It is about the uncomfortable truth that our peace is guaranteed by a nightmare. The file was stamped never open, yet we end here tonight. The journey is almost over. Look around the archive. The rows of metal shelves seem infinite in the dim light. The dust motes are suspended in the air, frozen in time. The hum of the server room is a steady, rhythmic pulse like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant dart. We have pulled every file. We have unrolled every blueprint. The desk is covered in the scattered history of our fears. The diagrams of the command rockets, the transcripts of the spies, the photos of the lonely sensors in the snow. It is time to put them back. Pick up the papers. Feel the weight of them. Smooth out the creases. Slide them back into the heavy manila folders. Slide, tap, close. The sound echoes in the quiet room. We are not just storing information. We are storing the memories of a world that almost died. Settle back into your chair. The work is done. The analysis is complete. All that is left is the reflection, the why. Let your breathing match the slow pulse of the blue light. You are safe. The machine is far away. To understand why the system is still waiting, we must understand the concept of institutional inertia. Great machines are hard to build, but they are even harder to kill. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the entire structure of the state fell apart. Factories closed. Ships rusted in the harbors. Space shuttles were left to rot in hangars covered in bird droppings. But the nuclear forces were different. They were the crown jewels. The generals who inherited the ruin of the empire looked at their broken country. They saw that their economy was smaller than Italy's. They saw that their conventional army was weak. They realized that the only thing that made them a superpower, the only thing that forced the American president to take their phone calls, was the nuclear arsenal. And the dead hand was the lock on that arsenal. It became a symbol of survival. To dismantle perimeter would be to admit that they were no longer a great power. It would be to admit that they were vulnerable, so they kept it. They polished it. They fed it electricity even when the cities went dark. There is a deeper psychological reason why the machine survives. It is the fear of the mistake. We humans know that we are flawed. We know that we get tired. We know that we get emotional. We know that under pressure we make bad decisions. The dead hand is our attempt to build something perfect. It is a monument to the idea of objective truth. In a nuclear crisis, truth is the first casualty. The radar screens lie. The spies lie. The politicians lie. But the machine does not lie. If the seismic sensor says the ground is shaking, the ground is shaking. We keep the system because, in a terrifying way, we trust it more than we trust ourselves. We trust the cold, hard math of the sensors more than we trust the judgment of a panicked leader in a bunker. It is the ultimate insurance policy against human error. Consider the landscape where the machine lives. The vast, empty spaces of Russia, the taiga, the tundra, the mountains. It is a landscape that swallows secrets. There are silos in the forests that have been overgrown by trees. To a hiker walking past, they look like hills, but underneath, the rocket is sleeping. There is a strange beauty in this hidden network. It is a secret geography that exists parallel to our own. We live on the surface in the cities, with our coffee shops and our Wi-Fi. The machine lives in the granite, with its cables and its codes. The two worlds rarely touch, but they are connected. Every time you turn on a light, you are using the same physics that powers the bomb. Every time you use a GPS satellite to find a restaurant, you are using the same grid that guides the warhead. The machine is woven into the fabric of our civilization. It is the shadow that gives the light its definition. Historians often argue about what kept the long peace. Why hasn't there been a great power war since 1945? Why haven't we destroyed ourselves? Some say it was trade. Some say it was diplomacy. But the files in the archive suggest a darker answer. We haven't destroyed ourselves because we built a gun, pointed it at our own heads, and wired the trigger to a motion detector. The dead hand made war impossible to win. If you attack, you die. If you decapitate the leadership, you die. If you try a sneak attack, you die. By closing every single loophole, by plugging every single gap where victory might be possible, the machine forced us to choose peace. It is a peace born of terror, a frozen peace, and that is why it is still waiting today. Because the logic hasn't changed. The equation is still the same. As long as nuclear weapons exist, the dead hand must exist. One implies the other. You cannot have the bomb without the guarantee that you will use it. Let's think about the people who maintain it today. In the remote bases of the strategic rocket forces, there are young officers on duty right now. It is nighttime in Russia. The snow is falling outside the blast doors. They are sitting in ergonomic chairs, watching flat-screen monitors. They are drinking tea. They are thinking about their families. Do they think about the machine? To them, it is just a job. It is a checklist. Check voltage on sensor array 4. Ping command rocket 12. The banality of it is what makes it so surreal. They are the caretakers of the end of the world. But they are also just people. This human element serves as the final buffer. We discussed the autonomy earlier, but we must remember that behind every autonomous system, there is a human who decided to turn it on. The machine is waiting because we want it to wait. We, as a species, have decided that this risk is acceptable. We have decided that the cost of safety is the existence of the Doomsday machine. Why do we tell these stories? Why do we open these files? Some might say it is morbid. Some might say it is scary. But here, in the archive chill, we believe that knowledge is a form of control. When we name the monster, it becomes less frightening. When we understand the circuits and the sensors, they stop being magic and start being engineering. By listening to this story, you have become a witness. You now know about the 15P011 rocket. You know about the Yamantau bunker. You know about the infrasound sensors. You are no longer walking blindly through history. You see the invisible wires, and in that seeing, there is a calm. You understand how the world works. You understand the delicate balance that keeps the roof from falling in. There is a concept in art called the sublime. It is the feeling you get when you look at a massive storm, or a mountain range, or the ocean. It is a mix of fear and awe. The dead hand is the technological sublime. It is a creation so vast, so powerful, and so indifferent to human life, that it inspires a strange kind of respect. It is a reminder of our own power. We were smart enough to split the atom. We were smart enough to build a machine that can outlive us. Perhaps, one day we will be smart enough to dismantle it, but not tonight. Tonight, the machine is on duty. It is taking the watch so that we can sleep. It is a dark guardian, a silent sentinel. The blue light in the archive is fading now. We are dimming the servers. The hum is getting quieter. Imagine the world map in your mind. Picture the curve of the Earth on the dark side of the planet. The lights of the cities are glowing like embers. Moscow, Berlin, London, New York, and in the empty spaces between the cities, the silent bunkers are sleeping too. That are not enemies tonight. They are just metal and concrete. They are just rocks and wires. The signal is flat. The seismic needle is steady. The wind is just wind. There is no crisis. There is no countdown. There is only the long, slow breath of history. We are leaving the archive now. We walk past the heavy steel doors. We turn the big iron wheel to lock them. Clank, grind, click. The secrets are safe inside. You are stepping out into the cool night air. The stars are above you. The same stars that the satellites watch. The same stars that the rockets would fly towards. But tonight, they are just stars. Beautiful, distant, peaceful. You can let go of the information now. You don't need to carry the weight of the nuclear codes. You don't need to worry about the sensors. The machine is doing its job. It is waiting. And because it is waiting, you are free. Free to rest. Free to dream. The paradox is complete. The machine that was built to destroy the world is the same machine that in its silence allows the world to continue. That is the silent reality. The archive is closed. The file is shelved. The ink is dry. Sleep well. The night is quiet. And the system is standing by.